Her Shifter Boss by Mary T. Williams. A romancely.com story. Chapter 1.
Marissa had been pacing in her cell for days. Her mind wasn't used to inactivity, and her body wasn't used to small places. She would pace for a time in her human form, then shift into her werecat form. Agilely, she would pounce from wall to wall, claws clinging to the stone, causing indentations. She'd hang from the light fixture briefly before dropping to all fours and mewling loudly, her indignation at such small quarters. Her fur, the color of a stormy day, was thick and beautiful, and her green eyes glared out of her head with human indignity. Human contact had been kept to a minimum. She saw the guards 3 times a day when they brought her food, but none of them spoke to her. She'd never really had friends. Her career had been time-consuming. Besides, as the second in command, reprimanding underlings was part of her job, so very few wers liked to be around her. She was known for her harshness. 2 had come to visit. The head, to ask her what the hell she'd been thinking, and her assistant, Bobby, to bring her essential items she'd need during captivity. "I have no answer for you, sir," Marissa had claimed when the head had asked her the question. Silence could sometimes save you, she had always believed, so her answers had all been non-committal or vague. But to intentionally endanger another wer? You've always been such a stout believer in protecting wers. The head had continued. Please tell me this wasn't about Nathan and jealousy. Marissa's head had come up, and her face had pinched closed. She'd pursed her lips. I still believe in the protection of wers who deserve our protection. The head had shaken his head. He'd known she wouldn't answer the question about Nathan. Marissa, please consider what I'm offering. Banishment isn't the worst thing that could happen. If this goes to trial, you could be imprisoned for a very long time. Marissa had smiled viciously. I won't go to prison, and I won't leave the city. The head had stared at her, brows furrowed. He'd asked himself if that statement had been the delusional belief of a woman who had succumbed to her emotions, or if it had been a threat, a warning, that she was planning something. He had said his goodbyes and, unknown to Marissa, had warned the guards that she might be planning an escape, to be on high alert, and to let him know if and when she had any visitors. Now, Marissa shifted back to human form, choosing to remain unclothed for the duration of her imprisonment. As proud of her human body as she was of her feline body, Marissa, like most wers, enjoyed nudity, but city living often made it an impossibility. She stroked her hands down her waist, smiling to herself as she thought of the differences between her body and Lucy's. She was trim, athletically so, while Lucy was curvy, and though she hated to admit it, gorgeous skin. Whatever, Marissa thought, I'm so much hotter than she is. I don't understand Nathan's infatuation with her at all. He's an idiot. But those thoughts didn't comfort her. He didn't want her, he wanted Lucy. And for that, the 2 of them would have to pay. The door at the end of the hallway banged open. Marissa glanced at the clock. Too early for lunch. She must have a visitor. As the thought passed through her mind, Bobby stepped into view. Marissa watched his eyes as he looked her up and down lasciviously, a smirk on her lovely face. When his eyes met hers, they were bolder than they'd been before. Her smirk changed to a seductive smile. Hi, Bobby, she purred at the werbear in front of her. She sauntered closer to the door of her cell, which consisted of bars while the rest of her room was walls. I'm glad you came down to see me. Bobby grinned foolishly at her. Good morning, Marissa. I've brought the things you asked for. He handed her a tote bag filled to the top. The guards pulled everything out and shoved it all back in, so it's a mess. Marissa sighed, her face that of a woman gravely injured by their lack of trust. Do they think you're going to smuggle in a knife or something? She began unpacking her bag, putting her personal items in the cabinet or on the bedside table. Bobby shrugged. Who knows? They didn't dig through the first bag I brought you. And they've never patted me down before either. Marissa lifted an eyebrow at him. Seems someone thinks I'm planning an escape. Would seem so, yes, Bobby answered with a smirk. Did you finish the book I gave you last week? I did. Could you bring me another tomorrow? I'm bored out of my mind, Marissa told him. She grabbed the book off her bed and handed it to him, her eyes conveying the message he expected. "Will do. Anything else you need?" "Nothing but a new book," she replied with a smile. He returned the smile. "Okay. Then I'm gonna go ahead and go. I'll see you tomorrow." He turned to leave, his mind urging him to open the book, but he couldn't until he was out of the prison area. Really, out of the building. He marched out quickly without speaking to anyone. He climbed in his car and turned it on before opening the book. Inside were the detailed plans of Marissa's escape. He read the simple ideas, marking changes as he did. He smiled and headed to the bookstore. The book he bought would have the time, date, and any changes needed. Soon, he thought, she'll be free again and we can continue with our plans. Lucy smiled at the old couple as she deposited their chocolate cake with 2 forks on the table. She made small talk with the businesswoman seated at the table behind them, and refreshed the coffee of the pair of college students studying together for whatever final they had coming up. Overall, not a bad afternoon crowd. Her tips had been solid, but she looked forward to the end of her shift. She had a date with Nathan tonight. Lucy, her best friend and coworker, Kayla, called her name. "Come here. Hurry." Lucy's eyes widened at the urgency in Kayla's voice, and she scurried behind the counter and into the back room. Kayla stood in front of her cubby, pointing with a mile-wide smile on her face. "Look what just got delivered to the back door." Lucy's eyes widened even more. A huge vase filled with an assortment of roses in different colors sat near her cubby. They were too large to fit inside. She gasped at their beauty and the lovely smell filling the air around them. Kayla was practically bouncing up and down with excitement as she handed Lucy the card. Lucy opened it and nearly teared up. "What's it say? Tell me," Kayla exclaimed. "To Lucy, the woman who has changed my life by making it brighter. I look forward to years of brightness with you. Love, Nathan." "Oh my God. I am so jealous." Kayla squealed as she leaned over the flowers to breathe in their heavenly scent. Lucy was at a loss for words. No one had ever sent her roses before. She shook her head, a dreamy smile on her face. She'd only just met Nathan, but she knew she loved him already, and she was pretty sure he felt the same way. She joined Kayla and breathed in their beauty, and her smile grew to fill her whole face. She opened her mouth to speak, but their boss, Jeff, walked in before she could utter a sound. "What the hell is that smell?" Jeff muttered. He looked at the two of them standing there, their noses over the roses, and grimaced. "Look, Jeff. Lucy's boyfriend sent her roses. Aren't they gorgeous?" Kayla asked, excitement still tinging her voice. Jeff snorted. "I guess." He looked at Lucy. "How much longer are you on shift? Those things reek." Lucy rolled her eyes at Kayla. Jeff had turned his back and walked into his office. She raised her voice and answered, "About an hour." Lucy and Kayla looked at each other as he grumbled to himself, not quite loud enough to hear. "Go home now and take those things with you. I can't stand that smell." Lucy's eyebrows shot up. She'd been hoping he would say that, but hadn't actually expected him to. Kayla giggled and mouthed lucky at her. "Okay, boss. I'll be out in 10. Have to take care of my tables first." "Hurry up," he growled at her. "And Kayla, get out front. You've got tables." "Yes, boss," Kayla called, mock saluting his crassness. As they walked back out front, Kayla mumbled to Lucy, "What an butt." "Yeah, who doesn't like the smell of fresh flowers?" "A butt who likes the smell of poo," Kayla quipped. They laughed loudly as they re-entered the dining area. "You've only got that one table left. Clear the other 2 and I'll handle the last one until they leave or Tiffany gets here." "Thanks, babe. I owe you one," Lucy said as she grabbed a tub to bust the 2 tables. She stopped at the table with the 2 college kids one last time, although they hadn't asked for anything but endless coffee refills. After she'd cleared the tables, she called to Kayla to let her know she was leaving and left quickly before Jeff could change his mind. The older couple, as usual, had left her a sizable tip, so she decided to spring for a cab since the flowers and vase would be difficult to carry the 2 blocks to her apartment. 5 minutes later, she was climbing out in front of her apartment and pushing the door closed with her butt. She balanced the roses precariously on her thigh as she opened the door to the building and again when she pressed the button for the elevator. At her door, the only option was to set them down to dig out her key and unlock the door. Once inside with her beautiful burden, she decided they needed to be in her bedroom on her dresser. Her phone pinged as she put the flower food into the vase after having checked the stems to make sure they'd been cut at an angle. A text message from Nathan awaited her response. Nathan, hey babe, I'll be there around 7. Okay. Lucy, sounds good. I just got home. P.S. I love the roses. They're perfect. Nathan, perfect like you. Lucy, you smooth talker, you. She imagined him laughing at her comment and smiled to herself. This man had somehow worked his way into her heart in a very short time. Being with him felt right, like she'd met her other half. She'd always thought that saying was stupid, but now she understood that it was true. She glanced at the clock on her phone and gasped. It was already 5:30, and he would be here at 7. She needed a shower to wash the cafe food smell off her, and she still hadn't decided what she was going to wear. Lucy locked her door before rushing to the bathroom to get ready. Lucy wiped her lips daintily with her napkin. She and Nathan had shared a sumptuous meal at her favorite hibachi grill. She watched him as he scooped more rice mixed with veggies and chicken into his mouth and smiled when he dribbled some down his chin. She leaned closer and wiped his chin with her napkin. Nathan grinned at her. Thanks, babe. I swear you're the cutest thing, Lucy commented, admiring his blonde locks and tan skin. He was all-American good-looking, and he was hers. Thanks, I guess, he laughed. You kind of make me sound like a little boy, she giggled. Yes, but an adorable one. He shook his head and took her hand in his. He lifted it to her lips and smiled at her as he kissed the knuckles. So, I have something important I want to talk to you about. Lucy's heart jumped just a little. Okay, the head and I were talking about you yesterday, he began. Her heart calmed immediately. A sliver of disappointment crossed her mind, but she pushed it aside as silly. You've known him less than 3 weeks, she chided herself. Lucy lifted her eyebrows at him in question. Nathan cleared his throat and took a sip of his wine. He asked me what you were going to school for, and I explained that you plan to be a journalist. Isn't that correct? Lucy was wary now. Yes, she said, dragging the word out. I still have 2 semesters left before I graduate. I told him you weren't finished, but I wasn't sure how long you had to go, Nathan replied. He still held her hand. He squeezed it gently and smiled. He wants to talk to you about working for the Guard. Lucy tilted her head, a quizzical look on her face. The Guard? What kind of journalistic job would he have to offer me at the Guard? Nathan shrugged. Some kind of media liaison type person. There really isn't anyone to handle that kind of stuff. What kind of stuff? Like the Austin going to the press kind of stuff. Nathan's answer jarred her. Austin had attacked her with the intention of assaulting her, but she'd shifted and frightened him away. A few days later, with the encouragement of Marissa, he had gone to the press about being attacked by a were. That could have been handled by a media liaison, right? Sure, Lucy replied, her mind on the possibility of working for the Guard. Finding a job as a journalist was difficult, and sometimes unpaid internships were the only jobs available until you proved yourself. But I still have 2 semesters. Is he willing to wait for me to finish? I have no idea. He asked me to talk to you about seeing him and talking to him about it, Nathan said. So are you interested in talking to him? Lucy frowned. What do you do for the Guard? I work in security, I guess you'd say, Nathan offered. My job is to keep an eye on new wers and make sure they're behaving, visit with wers who have not been following the rules, sometimes arresting them, things like that. So you and I wouldn't be working together? She asked. Nathan cocked an eyebrow at her. Don't want to work with your boyfriend? Lucy giggled. It's not that. And I'm staying with if right now, but if I were to work there, I don't want anyone thinking I'm getting preferential treatment because my boyfriend has been there for a million years. Nathan guffawed, causing a few heads to turn his way. I have absolutely no power to give anybody preferential treatment. He shook his head, still chuckling. She playfully punched his shoulder. Shut up. I don't know. He caught her hand and brought it to his lips again. My apologies, love. She sniffed. Apology accepted. But only because I want to get close to you later. Babe, why do you think I apologized? Nathan wiggled his eyebrows at her and ran his hand down her arm. If I were your boss, I'd pay very close attention to you. Lucy laughed loudly. I'd let you, handsome man. He sat back and returned to the subject. So what do you think? Will you go talk to him tomorrow? Lucy sighed, thinking. Yes, tomorrow afternoon. I think that will work. Nathan smiled at her. He lifted his hand and signaled the waiter to bring the check. I'm ready to get you home and take advantage of you. Oh no, boss man. Don't do that. Lucy playfully responded. I'll tell. Sure you will, he sarcastically agreed. Her hand snuck under the table and rubbed over his legs slowly while she looked at him. He shifted in his seat. I think I'm more in danger of being harassed by you. The next morning, after saying goodbye to Nathan and promising to meet him at the guard headquarters at 2, Lucy decided she needed to speak to her mother about all this. About Nathan and about the job with the guard. Her mother would be happy about Nathan, mostly. Her saying had always been if Lucy was happy, she'd be happy too. The job with the guard might take a little convincing. Her mother had been banished from the city after attacking a criminal who did unspeakable things. Although she could have been imprisoned or even executed, the head at that time chose to only banish her because the man had been causing harm to others. However, her mother still harbored ill feelings towards the guard because they hadn't helped her get the man arrested. They'd ignored the issue because, in her opinion, he wasn't harming wers, only humans. Wers came first for the guard, her mother believed, which was despicable. Lucy considered the matter from all angles. Should she call her mother? Should she see the head first and then talk to her mother? She cursed under her breath. She wished she had a friend in the city who was a wer, other than Nathan, of course. Kayla was human, but knew the truth about her and loved her anyway. But she didn't know anything about the wer underworld in the city. She could call Chopper, the weird werewolf recluse who had offered his assistance at any time. He had a prejudice against the guard as well, though a lot less pronounced than her mother's. He wouldn't like the idea of her working for them any more than her mother would. She assumed, so she decided her mother should be her first option. Sighing, she picked up her phone and waited for her mother to answer. On the third ring, her mother picked up. Hello, sweetheart. Lucy smiled. Her mother's voice sounded so close. She missed her so much. Hi, Mom. What's going on? Oh, same old things. Lucy heard her father's voice in the background. Your father says hi. Tell him I said hey, Lucy replied. So, what's going on with you? Marian asked. Your voice tells me there's something on your mind. Is it school? School's great, actually. Only 2 more semesters and I'm done, Lucy proudly proclaimed. I'm actually thinking if I take some classes this summer, I can graduate in December rather than May. That's great, sweetheart, her mother replied, then moved her mouth away from the phone to repeat the information to her father. She came back and said, Your father sends you 2 thumbs up. Lucy laughed. Tell him thanks. But that's not it, is it? Not really. Lucy took a deep breath and plunged in. So I've started seeing someone. Really? Her mother's voice was both surprised and excited. Since Lucy had entered her 20s, her mother hadn't hidden the fact that she was ready for grandchildren. Lucy reminded her continuously that her mother hadn't gotten pregnant until her late 20s. But her mother ignored that. Tell me every detail. His name is Nathan. He's a werecat. Lucy waited a moment to see if Marian would comment. But she didn't. He's fantastic, Mom. Bought me roses and takes me to dinner. He visits me at work just to say hi. Wow. Sounds like a great guy. Her mother mused. What does he do for a living? Lucy hesitated. This was her way of segueing from Nathan's position with the guard into her potential position. Well, he works for the guard. Silence loomed across the country through the phone lines. Lucy could almost hear her mother's thoughts racing through her brain. Mom? Are you there? I'm here. I'm walking to another room so we can discuss this without your father's ears listening, Marian replied. Lucy's heart sank. Leaving the room meant her mother wasn't going to say nice things. Before she had an opportunity to give her opinion about Nathan's profession, Lucy jumped the gun and said, "The head wants to talk to me about working for them as well." A clatter told Lucy her mother had dropped the phone in astonishment. When she had picked the phone up again, Marian's breathing was loud in her ear. "Are you out of your mind? Dating a man who works for that group of Nazis is one thing, depending on what he does for them. But actually working for them? Lucy, I don't think that's a good idea at all. I knew you'd react this way, but I want you to listen before you make any rash judgments, especially about Nathan." "All right, I'll listen first." "Thank you," Lucy murmured. She gathered her thoughts and tackled the lesser of the two issues. Nathan is a member of security, a high-ranking security person. He helped me a lot when I had some issues with a human claiming I'd shifted in front of him. "Why do I know nothing about this?" Marian hissed in her ear. Lucy cursed herself silently. Yeah, sorry. It's been handled. So there's nothing really to talk about anymore." Lucy prayed that was true. "Anyway, that's how Nathan and I met. I really like him. Trust him more than any man other than Dad. And he makes me happy." Marian remained silent for a brief moment. "All right, I understand. I'd like to know more about him later. But first, tell me about this job they want to hire you to do." Lucy cleared her throat and reminded herself to keep her temper under control. It wouldn't help matters to get in an argument with her mother, and she truly did want her opinion about the job. "Well, I haven't actually gone in to talk to the head. I'm going later today," Lucy began. "But it's a media liaison position, which is exactly the type of job I want after I graduate." Again her mother was silent a moment longer than was necessary. She breathed in and said in the exhalation, "Well, Lucy, I have to be honest with you. I don't like the idea of you working for those people. They make hasty, uninformed decisions." "Mom, the guard has changed. The new head is very open-minded. I don't think he makes uniformed decisions." "How do you know that?" "Mom, you haven't had any dealing with the guard in over 20 years. How do you know what you're saying is true anymore?" Marian let out a huff. "Damn, that's a good point. Thank you. However, you know nothing about this group except what your boyfriend has told you. Am I right?" Lucy thought about Marissa and the problems she'd caused, the kidnapping she'd ordered for Lucy, the fact that Austin had only gone to the press because of her. If Lucy was being honest, she'd seen more negative than positive things about the guard. But she wouldn't admit that to her mother at this time. She wanted to at least speak to the head about the job. "Okay, you're mostly right. Here's what I'm thinking," Lucy offered. "I'll go to the meeting this afternoon and see what's what. I'll call you tonight and discuss again." Marian nodded on the other end. She had already decided she would be contacting her friends in the city and ask a few questions of her own. But that was information her daughter did not need right now. "All right, sweetie. I guess that's a good idea," Marian conceded. "But I want to hear from you as soon as you get home." "Yes, ma'am," Lucy answered, feeling as if she'd won this particular battle. "I'll call you before Nathan and I go to dinner. So tell me a little more about this Nathan." Lucy could hear the smile in her mother's voice and it made her smile. While they chatted, she chose her interview outfit.
Chapter 2. Nathan had offered to pick her up at 1:15 and take her to the interview so she wouldn't have to pay for a cab. She was grateful. She'd only been there once, and that had been in the back of a van blindfolded. And when she'd left, her focus had been on Nathan and what she was going to do to him when she got him to her apartment. Her smile perked up as she remembered their first encounter. Needless to say, she had no idea where the guard headquarters were located. He rapped on her door at 10 after 1, and when Lucy opened the door, his eyes widened in appreciation. He whistled through his teeth and said, "Wow. Dressed like that, you'll be my boss before long." "Damn." Lucy giggled like a teenager and spun around to give him a view of every angle. "You like?" He grabbed her and hauled her up against him, his mouth crushing hers. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and she held him close as the kiss progressed to a little groping. She broke away with a sigh of longing and shimmied out of his grasp. "We'd better go before I rip your clothes off and ruin your interview," Nathan breathed. Lucy rolled her eyes at him and playfully nudged him. "I've got to reapply my lipstick, but it was worth it." "Give me two." She hurried into her bedroom. He watched her ass as she walked, nearly drooling. His afternoon schedule was about to change. He wanted her, and he wanted her soon. When her interview ended, he planned to bring her back here and enjoy that damn sexy body of hers. With lipstick freshly reapplied, Lucy grabbed her keys and bag, locked the door, and allowed Nathan to escort her to his car. He opened the door for her, always the perfect gentleman. When he joined her in the car, she said, "I feel like I'm going on a date rather than heading to an interview." "Are you nervous?" A little. Because I don't know much about the guard or what this job would entail, I'm not even sure what questions to ask. And I definitely don't know how to answer his questions." Helpful hint, the head is pro-wer in every meaning of the word. Also, somehow, he can sense a lie, even a small one that might not matter. Lucy thought of Marissa and her actions over the last week. He didn't seem to have a clue about Marissa and her behavior. Nathan groaned inwardly. He'd heard himself say the words and had thought of Marissa himself. He nodded. "Yeah, okay. I agree he missed that. Nobody's perfect. And you have to understand that Marissa was his right-hand gal, so to speak. He trusted her with everything. Doesn't that make her incredibly dangerous now that she's turned?" Lucy asked. Her inquisitive mind is what will get her this job, Nathan thought. She sees all angles. It does make her dangerous, yes, but she's in maximum security right now while the council decides what to do with her. The council? What's that? We have a council of wers made up of 3 of each kind, 3 werecats, 3 werewolves, and 3 werebears. The head of the guard is kind of like the president of the board of directors at a corporation. So there are 10 members total. And what exactly do they do? The council decides on major issues based on what is best for all wers. You know, like laws, criminal cases, how much involvement wers should have in the world of humans. Lucy's brows were furrowed in confusion. So, this council rules only this city, correct? What about the rest of the country? Each large city has its own council, as far as I know. There is no national wer council, although there probably should be. But that's not for me to decide. Lucy hummed as she thought. Do all cities require wers to remain hidden? Nathan looked at her and back to the front. I don't know. I've never traveled. You do know there are wers in Congress, right? Yes, but that's Washington, D.C. None of our concern, really, Nathan commented. Lucy shook her head in amazement. She couldn't believe his blasé attitude about the wer national community. Laws had been created decades ago when the wers and other supernatural beings had come out of hiding and joined the humans. These laws served 2 purposes, to protect the wers and supernaturals, and to protect the humans. Lucy had studied the laws in place and thought most of them still applied in today's society, but better representation would only make their lives as supernaturals or wers better. She remained lost in thought for the duration of the trip. Nathan glanced at her a time or 2, wondering if he had angered her. She saw him looking at her, smiled beautifully at him, and took his hand in hers. No, the smile said, I'm not angry. Just thoughtful. Nathan parked outside the headquarters. Lucy stepped out of the car and looked up at the building with a question in her eyes. I bet you're wondering why the building is so tall if our offices are located underground, Nathan said. When she nodded, he answered himself. The upper floors are apartments for those of us who work jobs like mine. My schedule is sometimes so hectic that I grab sleep when I can. He took her hand and guided her inside. I'll take you up after the interview if you'd like. They're actually pretty nice. Lucy smiled at him and leaned into his arms. I'd like that, Nathan. In the elevator, Nathan kissed her chastely, murmuring in her ear that he wanted to kiss her better, but the camera above their heads was certainly being monitored. She giggled and put her hand on his chest. She whispered, "Maybe we can put your apartment to good use." She wiggled her eyebrows and faced the doors of the elevator as they opened to reveal the main lobby. Heads turned to look at them, and several called out greetings to Nathan. He briefly introduced Lucy to various people as he guided her through to the head's office. When they arrived, his secretary smiled and said she'd let the head know they were there. Lucy turned to Nathan. "Thank you for the escort, but it's time for you to go." "What?" Nathan had fully expected to go in with her and join in the conversation. Lucy smiled at him. "Nathan, this is a job interview, not a friendly conversation." "I will go in by myself." Nathan nodded and touched her nose with his finger. "I'm constantly surprised by you, and forever proud that you let me call you my girlfriend." "You smooth talker," Lucy murmured and kissed him on the cheek just as the secretary cleared her throat, a smile on her face. "The head will see you now." "Thank you." Lucy waved at Nathan as she walked inside to face the head on her own. The head smiled at Lucy as she stepped into his office. He gestured for her to have a seat and offered refreshments before beginning the interview. At her decline, he moved behind his desk and sat in his massive chair, studying her as they discussed her degree, which she would have by the end of the year. "You'll be able to work on your classwork in your downtime here at the office, if you need to," the head offered. "We have no problem with that at all." Lucy nodded her thanks and asked, "Is this a paid position or an internship until I graduate?" The head chuckled. "An excellent question, Lucy. It is a paid position, although I will tell you that after you've obtained your degree, your pay will increase." "What exactly does this position require?" "We need someone to act as moderator between the guard and various media outlets like newspapers, radio, internet, and television. We also need someone to monitor our social media sites." "The guard has a Twitter?" Lucy asked, amazed. Again, the head chuckled at her expression. "Gotta keep up with the times, my dear." Lucy smiled at this. The head continued. "You'll be in charge of press releases about both positive and negative events that take place regarding anything to do with the guard or its employees. Just so that I'm aware, wasn't Marissa's job to act as media liaison?" Lucy's stomach jumped a little when she asked the question, but she wanted to know what she was getting herself into. The head puts his hands together and leaned his chin on his fists. He looked at Lucy seriously. "That was a part of her job, yes, but Marissa will no longer be working with the guard in any capacity after her behavior." "I see. The incident with the human revealing you to the reporter would be something you would handle, as well as anything else that comes up. Typically, if we can, we try to avoid the negative press. Our goal is to integrate into human society so we don't have to hide any longer." Lucy's eyes widened. She had no idea that WERS wanted to be more involved in the human world, although it made perfect sense to her to do so. Hiding in plain sight had always seemed such a waste of perfectly good people. And all the humans she knew had only good things to say about WERS. "Sir, I would love to help this organization become a bigger part of human society." "I love that idea. We need forward-thinking people like you, Lucy. We've spent too long in the shadows, as far as I'm concerned," the head claimed. "So, I'm offering you the job. What do you think?" "Honestly, sir, I'd like some time to think." I am very interested in the job, but I have to make sure it's the right thing for me right now. I understand. Let me know sometime this week, if you don't mind, he replied. Of course. I'll let you know tomorrow, Lucy emphasized. She rose and extended her hand to him. They shook hands and he walked her to the door. Nathan was waiting outside for her. Nathan, hello, the head greeted. How are you today? Doing well, sir, thanks. How are you? Good, good. Listen, talk this young lady into working here. She's the perfect fit, in my opinion, the head claimed, briefly touching Lucy's shoulder. Nathan laughed. Sir, I will do my best. I'd love to see more of her around the office. The slightly sexual tone with which this sentence was uttered was lost on the head, but not Lucy. She gaped at Nathan before returning her attention to the head. Thank you, again, sir. I'll have my decision to you by tomorrow morning, Lucy told him. She and Nathan turned as one and walked to the elevator without speaking. The minute the door closed, she smacked his shoulder, grinning at him. Damn it, Nathan. I almost snorted when you said that, Lucy admonished playfully. I can't believe he didn't pick up on what you said. Oh, he probably did, but he's too polite to say anything. Lucy gasped. But. He's going to think I'm a slut. Why are you rhyming? Shut up. They were silent as the elevator made its ascent. Want to see my apartment? Or are you mad at me? Nathan asked with a sidelong glance. Lucy rolled her eyes at him. As if I was mad at you. But we can pretend we're fighting and have make-up sex. Nathan pushed a different floor just as they reached the ground floor. The doors opened and immediately closed, and the elevator rose 10 floors. He glanced at her and smiled wickedly. Damn elevator. It's so slow. The apartment he led her to was so much better than hers. It had an open design. The kitchen and the living room were one large room. To the left was a bedroom and half bath, and to the right was the master bedroom with attached bathroom. The decorations were sparse. It was a man's apartment, after all. The apartment was clean, the furniture functional although plain, and the walls were mostly bare. Lucy shook her head and looked at him. Wow. Your bachelor pad is seriously in need of a woman's touch, she joked. Nathan grinned. I'm glad you brought that subject up. She looked at him quizzically. I've been thinking that maybe we should move in together. Her eyes widened, so he lifted his hands before she could protest. I know, it's fast. I know we've only known each other an incredibly short amount of time. But, I want you to put it in your mind and mull it over. Lucy shook her head in amazement. Nathan, as much as I love that idea, I've got so much to mull over right now. She looked at the apartment and in her mind decided that when they did move in together, they would live here. I'm not talking about moving in today. Just something to think about. She smiled at him. I'll think about it. Really hard. But right now, I want to make you really hard. Nathan threw his head back and guffawed, her joke a surprise. She moved forward and ran her hand down his chest and over his crotch. He smiled down at her and wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. I like that idea, too.
Oh no, it's about to get hot.
But we can't put this on YouTube as their policies don't allow it. I'm sorry.
But check the description of this video to join the exclusive Romancely Audio Velvet membership and get all steamy scenes for this story and more. Believe me, every sweaty detail is described.
If you're already an Inner Circle member, the love scene references, Her Shifter Boss, Chapter 2, Love Scene 1.
Okay, back to the story. Chapter 3. Bobby walked up to Marissa's cell door and waited for the guard to let him in. He thanked him quietly and stepped inside. He didn't speak until the door banged shut and the lock turned. He glanced at Marissa, who hadn't risen from her prone position on the bed. Her breasts were perky, the nipples erect in the cold air. He moved his eyes away from her in discomfort. She was his boss, after all, and not his type. He preferred men, and burly ones at that. "Good morning, Marissa," he murmured quietly, as if the door opening hadn't alerted her to his presence. "Hello, Bobby," Marissa answered without moving. "Sit down. Have you brought me another book?" "I have. I think you'll like it a lot," he smirked. "It's non-fiction this time." "Much more to my taste," she replied, her smile clear in her voice. "I've always preferred truth to falsehood." The irony in that statement escaped Marissa, but Bobby heard it and shook his head. She had been delivered to this cell through her lies. Bobby had destroyed so much evidence of other falsehoods so that she wouldn't be in more trouble. But he believed in her, always had. When she led her own faction, he would be her second in command. Her desire to keep all wers safe held him to her. They had similar beliefs about how humans and wers should live totally separate lives. He believed in her idea of a city of solely wer citizens. Marissa flipped open the book and glanced through the first several pages, skimming the words hand-written over the typed pages. The plan was devilishly simple, one nobody would expect. She grinned as she continued to flip, ignoring Bobby for the moment. "Any news I should be aware of?" she asked after 5 minutes of silence. Bobby cleared his throat and thought about saying no, but if someone else told her and he hadn't, he'd never hear the end of it. "I have heard a few things." Marissa finally sat up, swinging her shapely legs off the bed and placing her feet on the floor. The only garment she wore were panties. Her body was sculpted and lovely. Bobby appreciated the way she looked even if he felt no sexual attraction for her. "A few things? Anything interesting?" Again, Bobby cleared his throat. Marissa looked at him, eyebrow arched. "Why are you clearing your throat again and again? What aren't you telling me?" Bobby sighed in resignation. He knew his boss was about to lose her shit. The head had a meeting with that werewolf, Lucy. Marissa's jaw clenched visibly at the mention of Lucy's name, but her voice sounded calm. "Really?" Bobby stared at her, fearful of her reaction. Quiet Marissa was much more dangerous than a Marissa who expressed her anger. His silence irritated her. "Bobby, have you lost the ability to speak? Do you need a pen and paper so you can write it down?" Her voice dripped with disdain, and her eyes spoke of the stupidity she saw in him. He chastised himself for his cowardice. He offered her a job. "A job?" Marissa asked, her voice dropping lower than its normal pitch. "Doing what?" "Media liaison," he replied quietly, watching her. Marissa began to pace. Her thoughts were on fire with rage. "How dare that son of a bitch give my job away?" she thought. Although that had been only a portion of her job, she saw this as a bullet directly aimed at her heart. She growled as she shifted, pouncing on the bed and swishing her tail in anger. Bobby watched her. He had always thought she made a more beautiful cat than person, possibly because she couldn't speak. He'd seen her shift many times, mostly when she had serious thinking to do. She claimed she thought better as a cat. He waited patiently as she prowled around her cell, skirting around him, sometimes rubbing against his legs like a house cat. Her panther body was lithe and trim, muscular and deadly. The guard must have heard her growl because he peeked through the bars of the door at Bobby. Bobby waved him away, assuring him with his smile that he was in no danger. He listened to the guard's footsteps fade as he continued to watch Marissa. She looked at him with those cool, green eyes and sauntered towards him. She shifted suddenly, surprising him. "The plan must be executed tomorrow." Bobby nodded. He had guessed as much. "I will start the domino effect as soon as I leave." "How many do you have on our side?" "Only 14 inside, but one is a guard at the front door and will let in our allies at the signal from me." "And you've explained to them my intentions? That either I will kill the head or die trying?" "It has been made perfectly clear. I have also explained that no one is to touch him but you." Marissa nodded, satisfied. And the distraction? You've read the plan, Marissa. You know what will happen, Bobby replied, an edge to his voice at having been questioned. Marissa smiled wickedly at him. Are you prepared to die to make our dream come true? Bobby looked at her, his eyes unflinching. We all are. We should quit life, move to a secluded island, and have sex for the rest of our lives. Lucy mused as she played with Nathan's chest hair. I like staying in bed with you for hours on end. His chest rumbled when he chuckled. I would agree, but I like food and a roof. Blah blah, we'll live off the sea and build our shelter in the trees like that movie, with the family that is shipwrecked and builds fancy tree houses. Swiss Family Robinson? That's the one. Loved that movie when I was a kid. I used to dream of living in a treehouse. She sat up and said, Did you know there's a place in Samoa that has a treehouse hotel? It's on my bucket list to stay there. Your mind is fascinating. And all over the place, he commented. She sighed and laid back down. Always has been. A moment of silence passed. So, about moving in together. Nathan waited, holding his breath. He feared he had asked too soon and had possibly scared her. After all, they'd known each other only a few short weeks, but he'd known the minute he'd kissed her that first time behind the cafe where she worked. He loved her. I think it's a good idea, she continued. Nathan released his breath in a huff and said, Oh, thank gods. Lucy giggled and sat up to look at him. You know, though, that Kayla will be mightily disappointed. She wanted us to move in together. I think I can offer a better incentive if you move in with me. He pulled her down and kissed her, igniting their passion again. Breathlessly, Lucy said, Yeah, Kayla can't do that for me. She smiled down at him and winked. I was thinking we'd live here, especially if you decide to take the job the head is offering you. Lucy nodded. I think I'm going to take it. I have a couple more questions that have popped into my head. Nathan interrupted. While we were having sex? Wow, I need to step up my game. Lucy playfully slapped him. Shut up. While you were sleeping after. Do you always pass out right after? He shrugged and then nodded, and she rolled her eyes at him. I'm going to run home and change. I'll call the head and see if I can meet with him this afternoon and discuss getting started on my new job. She squealed in delight. This is so exciting. I'm happy for you, baby. Her smile drooped into a frown as a thought popped into her head. What's the matter? I have to give my 2 weeks' notice at the cafe. Jeff will probably be a real dick about it, Lucy claimed. She climbed out of bed so she could begin locating her clothes, which had been strewn about before their romp the evening before. If he's a dick, don't give notice. Just quit, Nathan told her. He stretched on the bed, moaning loudly, put his arms behind his head, and watched her naked body roam around his room collecting clothes. That would be mean to the other waitresses and waiters. I wouldn't do that. Nathan smiled. That's why I love you. You're such a good person. Her panties and bra were on, and she shimmied into her pants as she replied. And I love you because you're so damn hot. I almost don't want to put these pants on. Then don't. He grinned and rose, sauntering naked towards her. She held up her hand. Hold it right there, Nathan. I have to go. As much as I want that body, we'll have to wait. His grin didn't leave his face. He kissed her as he passed her on the way to the bathroom. You thought I was going to seduce you. Oh, how little you know me. It hurts. Lucy slapped his ass. Hey, ouch. I won't be in the office today. I've got several people I have to see today. How intriguing. I have a wonderful idea, she proclaimed, grabbing him around the waist and hugging him to her. Come to my place tonight. I'll cook some dinner and we can start packing up my stuff. I love that idea. Not sure what time I'll be there, but I'll text you. I'll do the same. Now kiss me so I can leave. Lucy grabbed a cab back to her apartment. She needed a quick shower and a change of clothes. What should have been a walk of shame was a prideful walk through the lobby of her apartment building. She loved the fact that she'd stayed at his apartment and that he loved her and she loved him. She was about to accept a job that she didn't think she'd be able to get until after she had graduated and interned. Her life was coming together just as she'd imagined it. She couldn't be happier. She called the head's office and spoke with his secretary, who told her he had an open appointment at 3. Lucy breathed a sigh of relief. It was only 11, so she had plenty of time to get ready, eat, and even check her class assignments for the week. While she worked, she called Kayla and put her on speakerphone. "Hey, Kayla. Hey, what's going on? You will not believe what's happened," Lucy exclaimed, abandoning her laptop to focus on her conversation with her best friend. "First of all, I've been offered a job. I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice at work tomorrow." "Oh, Lucy, I'm so happy for you. Tell me about the job," Kayla exclaimed. Lucy launched into an explanation of what she knew about the job. "I'm going there today to get the rest of the details. I guess I'll start in 2 weeks. "That's great. And exactly what you're going to school for." "I know." Lucy hesitated but decided to tell her quickly, like pulling off a band-aid. "So, Nathan asked me to move in with him today." Kayla was silent for an extra second. "Really? I know. We've only known each other for a short time, but I know this is the real thing. I know he's the one." Lucy waited for her reply, holding her breath in expectation. "Lucy, I'm happy for you. I love you and want the best for you. And if this is what's best, then I'll come over and help you pack." "Oh gods, I'm so glad you said that. I was so scared you'd be mad at me." Lucy breathed. "Mad? No. I know we talked about moving in together, but we never progressed past talking. I'm glad you found the one. I do have to admit, I'm jealous though," Kayla laughed. "Well, I have to get dressed and prettied up for my second interview. I'll see you tomorrow at the cafe," Lucy said. "Sounds good," Kayla answered. Lucy hurried in to the guard's headquarters. She was more than 10 minutes early, but she rushed anyway. Being late was one of her biggest pet peeves, and besides, she still needed to impress her future boss. She checked her reflection one last time in the elevator doors before stepping out and heading for the head's office. He was waiting in the lobby for her, smiling. He shook her hand and ushered her into the office. "Welcome back, Lucy. I guess you've made your decision. I hope it's in our favor." Lucy smiled at him as she sat in the cushioned chair across from him. "Yes, sir. I'm here to let you know that I would love to take the job." The head clapped his hands and rubbed them together in happiness. "Fantastic. I'll have a contract drawn up for you to look over tomorrow. When can you start?" "I work at a cafe near my apartment. I would like to give 2 weeks' notice so I don't put them in a bind," Lucy explained. "Would that be all right? I'll do you one better. Start in 3 weeks. That way you'll have time to move." The head grinned knowingly at her, as a father would who knew her secret. Lucy stared at him mock suspiciously. "Move," the head chuckled. "Nathan stopped by earlier. We're very close, Nathan and I, almost like father and son." Lucy smiled. "I knew he had a lot of respect for you. I'm glad he has someone to confide in. We've been working closely together for years. I want him to take this job when I retire," the head told her. Lucy's brow furrowed. "I think he likes the position he's in, sir." The head nodded. "I knew you were perfect for him. You're a truth teller." "I do try. I hope that wasn't offensive," Lucy asked. "Of course not. I need someone who is willing to tell me things I don't want to hear," the head said. With a sigh, he added, "Marissa used to do it. Now I guess that will be part of your job." On the detention floor, Marissa waited patiently in the nude so she could swiftly shift into her werecat form. Bobby and one of the guards would open the door at precisely 3:30, and they would shift together before putting their plan into action. The rest of the wers who would be joining her waited upstairs, and a dozen more waited out front to be let in by the security guard who had chosen her over the head. All would be in were formed by 3:35 and ready to attack. Marissa rose to pace as she ran through the plan again in her mind. She had 3 wers who would help her get to the head's office. Bobby had encouraged the rumors of a werbear who was homeless and had managed to move into the zoo on the other side of town. This would require Nathan's presence as he investigated, and it would take him all day. Marissa felt sure that he would be her biggest problem if he were here. She'd had to get rid of him for the entire day. She stopped pacing as a thought occurred to her. Nathan would be the one who temporarily took over after the head's death. After her downfall, he was next in line, sort of like second in command. She smiled. He wouldn't like that one bit, and he wouldn't be good at it because it wasn't his passion. Hopefully the guard would be in chaos the way she planned after the head's death. She'd be able to create a new group and take over the city with ease. The door clicked open precisely on time. Marissa looked up and smiled at Bobby, already in his form. Behind him, a werebear stood, watching, waiting for her signal. She smiled as she shifted. Time to begin. The head and Lucy were laughing. He told her a story about Nathan, a story from his first year with the guard as a young man. He had been assigned to the detention center, where most young wers began their careers with the guard. A beautiful werebear had been detained for shifting in the middle of a mall while drunk. She had tricked him into believing she was sick and needed a doctor. He'd opened the door to check on her. She'd shifted before he could take one step, and she attacked him. He managed to shift and hold her off, but it had taken 3 wers to get her back in her cell. Lucy shook her head. He'll be so mad at you for telling me about this. But if you have more, tell me. The head waved his hand and laughed. I saved him the trouble of telling you himself. That would have been more embarrassing, don't you think? Lucy shrugged her shoulders, giggling anew. Who knows? An alarm went off somewhere outside the head's office. They looked at each other. Lucy opened her mouth to ask him what was going on when his secretary burst through the door. Sir, we have to get you out of here. We're under attack, she screeched, rushing to his side after bolting the office door. The head had risen when she'd come in. He shook his head in bewilderment. What? What do you mean, under attack? I'm not sure what's happening, but there is fighting on the ground floor, and someone tripped the alarm. I called down but got no response. Together, the 3 of them moved to the bank of security screens, hidden behind a panel to the left of the head's desk. Werewolves, werebears, and werecats were fighting. Lucy watched, astonished at the violence on the black and white screens. Breathlessly, she asked, How do you tell who is fighting for the guard and who isn't? No one answered her. The secretary grabbed the head's arm. Sir, we have to go. Look, she pointed at one screen. A group of wers were fighting their way to the elevator. A werebear and werecat, obviously members of the guard, fell under their onslaught, and 3 of them stepped into the elevator. The head tapped a button and the view changed to the inside of the elevator, where one shifted into human form. She looked into the camera and smiled maliciously. The head growled deep in his throat. Marissa! She shifted back into her werecat form as the elevator doors opened. Lucy's eyes widened. She pulled out her phone and texted Nathan. Across town, Nathan's phone buzzed. An hour ago, he had just about decided he'd been sent on a wild goose chase for the werebear who had decided to live in the zoo. He'd been to the zoo, but the bears there had been natural bears. But a zookeeper had stopped him when she heard him talking on the phone to one of their information people. She told him that a werebear had been living in the zoo, but the owner had kicked him out when he realized he wasn't a real bear. She'd heard rumors that he was now living on the street, homeless. She gave him a couple of places to look for him, but so far he'd only been given more information that might lead to him. He glanced at the homeless man who had told him he'd seen a bear just last night, a big purple one. Would you excuse me, sir? I have to take this. The man nodded, and Nathan used the excuse to walk back to his car. He read the text message. Lucy, get back to headquarters now. Marissa has broken out and has an army of wers. They are attacking. Nathan had to read the lines twice before he clearly understood the meaning. He cursed and sent his reply that he'd be there as quickly as possible, but he was almost an hour away. By the time he got there, whatever damage Marissa planned would be done and over. He rushed to his car and jerked the door open. Behind him, the homeless man yelled at him to find that purple bear and put him back in the zoo. Nathan rolled his eyes. He was beginning to tire of these ridiculous assignments. His tires screeched as he peeled out of the parking lot where he'd found the homeless man and his imaginary bear.
Chapter 4. Lucy, the head, and the secretary stared at the office door, unrealistically hoping that Marissa's plan did not include killing anyone. The door was locked, but it wouldn't hold 3 strong words out for long. The secretary gasped suddenly. "Marissa knows where I keep the spare key to your office," she said, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide. At that moment, the metallic click of a key being inserted into a lock could be heard. The head pushed Lucy and the secretary behind his desk and moved in front of it, hoping Marissa would focus her anger and deadly intent on him. He stiffened when the door opened slowly, preparing to shift if necessary. In his mind, as the door opened, he rapidly listed the types of training Marissa had undergone. She was an expert at computer skills, he remembered, but what concerned him most at this moment was her combat training. Many wers went through combat training, even those who would probably never see combat in their lives. Marissa had continued her training until her arrest as her exercise routine. She was a skilled fighter, both in human form and in werewolf. The head had also gone through this training, but it had been years ago and he had not practiced in years. He glanced back at the 2 women huddled behind his desk. Neither of them had any training. The head watched as Marissa walked into his office as she had 1,000,000 times before. Her companions remained in their worst state, prepared to attack should it be needed. The werewolf had blood on its muzzle, and the werebear growled menacingly, staring at the women behind the head. The head hoped to take the lead in this exchange so he could end it quickly. "Marissa," the head acknowledged. Marissa lifted her head nonchalantly and looked at him with steely eyes. "William." The head secretary gasped. Once a head is elected, that person is no longer referred to by his or her name among the wers. From that day until resignation or death, that person is called the head, whether male or female. The tradition had begun long ago. Calling him by his first name was considered incredibly disrespectful. The head's eyebrow arched up. "Prison has changed you," he said coolly, his joke not meant to invoke laughter, although the werebear snorted. Marissa made a noise deep in her throat, almost a growl, but more like a hum of irritation. She moved closer to the head, her eyes never leaving his. "You've changed the guard since becoming the head. Several wers have been unhappy with your leadership for some time. It's time to make a change. Is that a fact?" The head moved to the left, away from his desk and the 2 women behind it, hoping to draw attention away from them. The werebear, who had been staring at the women when they'd first walked in, had moved his attention to the interaction between the head and Marissa. "Marissa, the only person who has indicated that there is any type of problem is you, and that has only been since you were caught undermining the guard." Marissa rolled her eyes. She drawled his name slowly. "William, it was only a matter of time before someone confronted you about the ridiculousness the guard has become. Pardon my language, but you are talking a whole lot of shit you know nothing about." Marissa chuckled menacingly. She stepped closer to the head, stood within arm's length of him. "The guard has become shit since you took over." And now, her hand became a panther's claw, only her hand, there will be an alternative to the guard. She plunged her hand, claws first, into the head's chest. She yanked down, creating 4 massive lacerations that spurted blood onto the floor and over her naked breasts. Lucy and the secretary screamed simultaneously and loudly, drawing the attention of the 2 wers near the door. Marissa looked at the women and grinned as she released the head, who fell to the floor. The secretary ran to him, dropped to her knees, and tried to staunch the blood flow with the jacket she'd yanked off. Marissa and Lucy hadn't lost eye contact since the secretary had moved away. They stared at each other as Marissa's hand evolved back into a human hand. Later, Lucy would remember this and wonder how she'd done it. Lucy glared at her, pure hatred clear on her face. Marissa wiggled her eyebrows at her, provoking a response. Lucy roared as she shifted, pieces of her torn clothing flying all over the room. She leaped onto the desk in her werewolf form and pounced on Marissa, who had a look of shock on her face. Clearly she had not actually expected Lucy to attack. Lucy's werewolf body slammed into Marissa's human form, and they hit the wall and fell to the floor. Beneath her, Lucy felt Marissa shift just as she clamped her mouth on a shoulder and bit down. She drew blood, but Marissa used her claws to rip open Lucy's flank, and Lucy released her shoulder before too much damage had been done. Lucy howled in pain and anger and twisted her body so that Marissa was on top. She used her back legs and flung Marissa across the room. Marissa hit the desk with a crash but was on her feet in a moment, her well-trained body prepared for this kind of scuffle. Lucy scrambled up on all fours, panting, blood dripping from her side. With some satisfaction, she saw blood matting the fur on Marissa's shoulder. Marissa looked at her shoulder out of the corner of her eye, furious that the other woman had drawn first blood. She turned back to Lucy and hissed, her panther eyes frightening. Lucy growled deep in her throat, a terrifying, threatening sound. No thoughts entered either woman's mind except lust for the other's blood. They circled each other. Lucy spared a glance at the two wers who had entered with Marissa. They watched with interest but showed no inclination to help their leader. Lucy assumed she'd told them not to. She looked back at the werecat and lowered her head dangerously, indicating an imminent attack. Marissa recognized the lowered head and surged forward quickly, claws extended, teeth bared. Lucy sidestepped and turned her body, her target Marissa's throat. But Marissa anticipated the movement, twisted, and slammed her uninjured shoulder into Lucy's windpipe as she extended her neck to reach her throat. Lucy dropped, and Marissa shifted swiftly and kicked Lucy in her injured flank, breaking her ribs and causing the blood to flow more freely from the claw marks. Marissa walked around her slowly, staring at her like she was a piece of garbage, and delivered another kick into her other side. Lucy lay on the floor, knowing she couldn't shift because her injuries were too great. In her human form, she would die. Marissa stared down at her, alarm bells sounded in Lucy's mind. She's going to kill me, Lucy thought. She looked at the head and could tell by the secretary's demeanor that he had died. She lowered her head to the ground to catch her breath, waiting for the death blow. Marissa grinned at her as if reading her mind and shook her head. No, I'm not going to kill you. You're not worth my time. Lucy growled quietly, the only response she could give as a wolf, and the only response she could give with broken ribs. Marissa laughed at her. Don't shift, bitch. Those injuries would kill a human. But you know that. Say hello to Nathan for me. Lucy swiped at her leg, but Marissa sidestepped it and kicked her in the face. Lucy's eye exploded with pain, and she saw stars. She slumped to the floor, not unconscious but certainly rattled, and watched as Marissa walked out with her companions. Hands touched her side and voices called out for help, but she slipped into unconsciousness so her body could heal. Marissa called a retreat as she marched through the building, words around her like she was some sort of warrior goddess leading her troops through the battlefield. Bobby loped up beside her and shifted into his human form to walk with her. Several wers inside joined our ranks as soon as they heard the head had been killed, Bobby reported. I have no idea how many we lost, but I only see a total of 7 dead. I think we gained more than we lost, though. How many? Bobby glanced over his shoulder. I'm not sure of the exact number yet. Injuries? A few, but nothing so bad they can't walk out of here on their own. I assume you've set up a base somewhere? Marissa asked as she stepped gingerly over a dead werecat she didn't recognize. Bobby avoided a puddle of blood before answering. Of course. It's about 10 miles north of here in a warehouse purchased over 3 years ago. Purchased how? Discreetly, of course. Through a dummy corporation with an unknown CEO, Bobby replied. Marissa smiled. Excellent work. How do we get there? I thought you'd want to make a statement. I'm thinking, in reform, we run through downtown, knocking people over, perhaps slicing one or two, without killing them. No need to involve the human police before we're hidden again if we can avoid it. I've chosen a subway entrance about a mile from here. We'll frighten the humans and ride the subway, as wers, to our new location. Marissa threw her head back and laughed as they stepped out of the building and into the sunshine. No humans were nearby to see the spectacle of dozens of wers stepping out in their reforms, beautifully dangerous, or the naked couple laughing together. Marissa smiled at Bobby. Bobby, if you weren't gay, you'd be my soulmate, so much do we think alike. He returned her smile. I agree. He shifted and looked up at her, werewolf eyebrow cocked. Marissa turned and raised her voice to address the wers. Wers! We have been in hiding long enough. The humans know we exist, but they refuse to give us the freedom to be ourselves. Let's make a statement. Don't rush through town, my friends. Let them see us. Knock them down, play with them a little. Let's go! A chorus of howls and roars answered her call to arms. She grinned and shifted, standing proudly in the sun in her werecat form. She turned to her troops and roared the order to move, the sound reverberating off the nearby buildings. She ran, and they fell in behind her. Moments later, they reached crowded downtown. A werebear roared, and a werewolf howled. Several humans froze in place as the wers bounded past them at medium speed, intentionally slamming into humans, knocking them into walls or to the ground. One werewolf leaped on a man and ripped a hole in his suit, although the cuts she delivered would prove to be shallow. A werecat attacked a woman and her dog. He grabbed the dog in his mouth and yanked, pulling the leash so hard the woman's arm came out of its socket. He killed the dog as she screamed in fear and pain. A child, separated from her mother, cried out in fear. A werebear stopped and looked around for her mother, then head-butted the child in her direction until she saw her. The woman jerked her daughter up and ran in fear. The werebear rolled its eyes, amazed that the woman had watched him save her child and was still afraid. He turned and galloped away. As they ran, wreaking havoc among the humans, Marissa thrilled in the escape, thrilled in the idea that she could be herself in public, openly a wer. A new age, she mused to herself as they reached the subway. She slowed her pace and allowed her troops to surge ahead of her. The screams echoing up from the underbelly of the city amused her. Men, women, and children rushed to the exit to get out of the subway. Wers were still coming down and shoved past the humans, most of whom froze after moving to stand against the walls. Marissa sauntered down the stairs slowly, eyeing each horrified human gleefully. She snarled at this one, snapped her jaws at another, and relished the fear on their faces. If they won't accept me the way I am and let me be a part of this world, then I'll rule this world and make them hide, Marissa thought as she walked onto the waiting train like royalty. News reports were already coming in. Several of the humans had videoed the parade of wers as they galloped through downtown. One brave soul had even stood by and videoed the werecat killing the woman's dog, capturing the event and putting it on Facebook immediately after. He sent it to the news station as well, who broadcast it nationally. Citizens sent video after video of the incident, giving the news station plenty to choose from, and within minutes, the entire nation could watch as a pack of wers terrorized the city. Police and emergency personnel were called to respond to help the injured, although there were few more serious than bruises or small cuts. The worst injury, in fact, was the woman with the dog, whose shoulder had been yanked out of socket. Several wrecks had been caused by the appearance of the wers rushing through town, but nothing more serious than a fender bender from the drivers rubbernecking to see them. Reporters interviewed several who were there. Some commented on how terrifying the scene had been, while others reported that they thought it had been fantastic and beautiful. One woman, who had watched from the safety of her car, claimed that it was about time the wers came out of the closet, a comment that would enrage many wers who had been locked in that closet by humans. A man who had been knocked unconscious when a werbear had slammed him into a building was furious and wanted all wers shot on sight. News stations tried to get in touch with city officials for comments, but none were speaking to the press right now. They had been told of the head's death and were anxiously waiting for the guard's official statement. Nathan listened to the news reports on the car radio as he sped through town. He cursed when he saw the damage along the street the wers had taken flight, his mind racing at the implications of such actions. He parked on the sidewalk in front of the building and sprinted inside. His thoughts drifted to Lucy. She had been meeting with the head and would have been in his office when Marissa's little coup had taken place. If she had been inside the office with the head, he would have protected her, Nathan told himself as he halted just inside the door to take in the scene before him. 3 wers lay on the floor surrounded by pools of blood. All were in their worst state, as that was the form they'd been in when they died. Nathan didn't recognize any of them and wondered how they would identify these victims of Marissa's hatred. He sighed heavily as a were he recognized as head of security stepped forward to speak with him. Nathan, the man, whose name was Matt, spoke quietly. "Tell me what happened," Nathan instructed brusquely. He put a hand on the man's shoulder to reassure him. Matt swallowed. "We've lost 7 total. We're working on identifying them now. We aren't sure who was with Marissa and who wasn't at this point." "But Nathan," he hesitated, "Marissa killed the head." Nathan froze. He stared at the man, shook his head, and dashed upstairs, hoping the man was mistaken. Matt followed him, but didn't speak as they rode the blood-splattered elevator down to the head's office. The doors weren't completely open when Nathan flung himself out and ran through the door to the office. His head jerked from side to side until they landed on Lucy, in her werewolf form, laying on the head sofa like a sweet lapdog. His mind wondered briefly why she hadn't returned to her human form, but the blood on her body answered his question. "Lucy!" He ran to her side and dropped to his knees, inspecting her with hands and eyes. "Baby, I'm so sorry." Lucy smiled her wolfy grin at him, sad though it was, and indicated that he should look behind him. Satisfied that after her body had healed a little more, she would be fine, he turned. The head lay on the floor, blood drying over the mangled area that used to be his chest. His loyal secretary sat next to the body, holding his hand, softly weeping. He moved to the pair and knelt. The secretary looked up at him and smiled a watery smile. "He tried to protect us," she whispered. "Marissa killed him. I've never seen anything like it." Her hand, only her hand, Nathan, changed into a werecat paw, and she killed him. He never saw it coming because only her hand shifted. She shook her head and looked back down at her boss. Nathan patted her on the shoulder and looked at his boss, the man who had been like a father to him for the last decade of his life. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he recalled several sweet memories of this man. His hatred for Marissa was sealed. He would find her and destroy her, no matter the cost. He shook his head. Revenge wasn't the answer. He was just angry. Reality began to set in as he held the hand of his friend and wept. Selfishly, he thought of himself for a moment. He understood that because Marissa was gone, he was next in line to take over until a permanent head could be elected, and he was not happy about it. He wasn't a leader, he liked being somewhat anonymous, enjoyed working in the field, his only concern the job he'd been told to complete that day. The hundreds of things he'd have to deal with entered his mind, and though he wanted to shrug them off and hand it over to someone else, he steeled his mind and began making a list of all the things that needed immediate attention. First, he'd need to make an assessment of the damages done, including the disaster that Marissa had caused on the streets. He'd need to contact the human mayor and create a strategy to begin handling this. He had no idea how to begin. He turned to the secretary, whose name he had never learned. Nathan touched her hand. "I'm sorry, but I've never learned your name." She smiled at him again and wiped her nose with a handkerchief from her pocket. "I'm Sarah." Nathan smiled back at her. "I need your help." Sarah nodded her head emphatically. "Of course you do. You're the temporary head, aren't you?" "Yes, and I have no idea where to start," Nathan explained. "That's where I come in," she said, grateful for something to do. "First, you have to get in touch with the mayor. I'm sure they're waiting for your call." After placing a hand once more to the head's forehead, her little goodbye, she rose and looked at Matt. "Matt, Nathan needs a report on all who are dead and injured." She turned back to Nathan. "You'll also need a report on exactly what happened downtown." Nathan nodded. "Turn on any news station or look on the internet. It's already national news." He'd moved back to sit with Lucy for a few minutes before his job took him away from her. "Call someone up here to help Lucy. Matt, get a list of the dead and injured up here as quickly as possible and see if you can figure out who was with Marissa." "That second one will take a little more time, Nathan," Matt replied. "I understand. Worry about the dead and injured first. We'll have to complete a full investigation. And send someone with a stretcher to retrieve the head's body. We'll plan his funeral later tonight. I'll call the mayor after that." Sarah and Matt left to follow his orders with nods. Nathan turned to Lucy, whose eyes were closed. She opened them and winked at him. Her body had almost healed the broken ribs, another half an hour and she'd be able to return to human form. Nathan probed her body more carefully for any other wounds, but she used her paw to push his hand away. She licked his hand, then her wounds, then looked at him meaningfully. He understood her meaning. "Just lay here until you can shift, my love," Nathan murmured to her as he ran his hands over her soft fur. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Lucy sighed into his palm and licked it gently. She nudged him with her hand, silently telling him to get to work. She closed her eyes, and he rose to begin handling this catastrophe created by a jealous bitch.
Hey there. Did you know that we've other hot romances like this that we want to release? But we need your help. Subscribing shows us that you're part of our journey and allows us to make more of these stories at a higher quality. So please, my queen, subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel now. Thanks. Now back to your story. Chapter 5. After a quick briefing of the events that unfolded that led to the head's death, Nathan called the mayor. Mayor Andrew Quisenberry had been elected only 6 months ago, and thus far, his time in office had been without problems. After this morning's debacle, his office was in a tizzy, fielding calls from news stations all over the country. He'd called the guard, which had been in chaos. He'd been told the head was dead and his temporary replacement would call him as soon as all the reports were in. Andrew had grown up around wers. He'd been born in Colorado, in the mountains. Several of his friends had been wers, and although they hadn't shifted in the middle of town, everyone had known what they were and had treated them like everyone else. He'd been shocked when he'd moved to the city and the wers lived in hiding. He hadn't known a place like that had existed. After he'd been elected mayor, he had appointed his best friend, a werewolf, as one of his advisors. Robert had immediately made contact with the guard when he'd arrived in town and introduced Andrew to the head. He and the head had hit it off, had agreed on many human/were issues, and wanted to pull the city into the century by bringing the wers out of hiding. "I should be hearing from the guy who is taking the head's place temporarily any moment." Andrew sighed. "This is such terrible timing. Right when the head and I were getting ready to start integrating the two peoples." He shook his head pensively as he stared out the window of his office. "The opportunity isn't lost, Andrew," Robert mused as he took a seat in front of the desk, opening the laptop he'd carried in with him. "You're right. It depends on who they elect, of course. Andrew murmured. He turned back to Robert. Does this event destroy that plan? Robert shook his head thoughtfully. I don't think so. It will just take more time and more charm, both on your part and on the new heads, than may have been necessary before. Andrew nodded and straightened. This will happen, damn it. Whoever takes over will get on board. He looked at Robert again. Who's the temporary guy? Do you know him? He's a good man and would make a good leader, but he doesn't want to be the head. He's not a politician at all, isn't interested in any of that kind of stuff. How well do you know him? I've met him here and there. He works in security dealing with newbies or wers who have broken were law. What does he think about integration? I'm pretty sure he'd be on board. He's a rule follower, sure, but he's got human friends who know what he is. He used to see the were Marissa, who caused this. Marissa is behind this? I had no idea, Andrew said. She staged a coup after being arrested for something. She escaped from the detention center and killed the head. I'm not sure what she did to get arrested, but she was the number 2. Yes, I know. She was in on all the meeting between the head and me about the integration plans. Andrew considered. I wonder if she's against it. I have no idea. Rumor has it she plans to start her own group of wers to lead the city, to end the guard. She has a good start. The guard will be in chaos until the new head is elected. And this Nathan guy would be a good leader, but I really don't think he'll accept the position, Robert reminded him. He is dating a wer. Maybe she has some influence over his decision. We may be able to talk to her as well if necessary, although that could hurt us more than help. You never know. Andrew lifted an eyebrow at Robert. You seem to know him better than you originally implied. Are you friends? Robert smiled mysteriously. I have sources. I don't have to be pals with someone to know about them. Andrew snickered. You worry me sometimes, my friend, and you know too much. You know too much about me as well. So we're even, Robert added with a laugh. Andrew's secretary buzzed in to let him know Nathan was on the line. Andrew thanked her and hit the button for speakerphone. Nathan. Hello, Andrew. How are things? Nathan answered, his voice loud over the speakerphone. Better for me than for you, I'm afraid, Andrew replied. I have you on speakerphone, Nathan. My advisor is here with me. Is that all right? That's perfectly fine, Nathan said. Hello, Robert. Robert's eyebrows lifted as well. Obviously, Nathan had his sources as well. Hello, Nathan. Sorry to be talking to you in these circumstances. Well, a beer after work certainly would have been better. The 3 men laughed at Nathan's joke, easing some of the tension. All right, let's discuss what's going to happen. I've got the news stations breathing down my neck for an official statement, and I've got nothing to say. First, a question. How many humans are aware of the guard's existence? Andrew and Robert exchanged a look. Andrew replied, honestly, probably not that many. When wers became public, the city council asked that they remain hidden in the city, not showing there were forms. The leader of the wers at that time agreed it would be safer. The guard was created to maintain that order. Safer? For whom? Nathan asked, an edge in his voice. I have no idea. I wasn't even born then, and my parents aren't from here, Andrew replied. Robert. No idea, man. I'm from the same small town as Andrew. We moved here together for college and never left. I assume you know about Marissa's involvement? At the murmurs of assent, Nathan continued. The official statement needs to include the guard, what it is, and what has happened. Knowledge is going to be useful in dealing with Marissa. Getting the word out about the guard was the first step towards integration. The head and I had planned to begin in the next month. This actually pushes us forward. Andrew mused almost to himself. Robert cleared his throat, reminding him that someone was listening to him. Andrew, I think this conversation needs to happen in person. Nathan told him. I know that you and the head were planning to integrate wers into society, and I'm all for it. But I'm not going to be the head. I think we can implement a few things, though, before I hand the reins over to someone else. Andrew smiled knowingly at Robert. I'd like that, Nathan. Let me get the official statement from you now. and let's have lunch this week to discuss all this. Sounds like a plan. Bring Robert, and I'll bring my associate as well. Nathan launched into the official statement while Andrew and Robert both took notes to make sure they got it right. After hanging up, Andrew looked at Robert. I thought you said he wasn't a politician? Seems I may have been mistaken. That plan of his to get the integration started before giving up the position is sneaky, and exactly what a politician would do. Agreed. But he did say he planned to give up the leadership role. Though, Andrew ruminated. I wonder if he'll change his mind once he has been in power. It will take a few weeks to elect the new head. Correct. I would assume so. Nathan will pull the council in, and they'll ask for nominations. The election will take place after that, Robert explained. So Nathan will have the opportunity to make decisions as the head for a time. We'll see if he changes his mind about retaining the leadership. Nathan turned the speaker phone off and looked at Lucy, who had been listening. Her wounds had healed quickly, as any worse would have. Her ribs were no longer broken, only deeply bruised, and the cuts looked 2-day-old. Only a few hours had passed. Reports had been coming in and out of the office all day. Wers were panicking, humans were panicking, and Marissa could not be found. Nathan couldn't understand how she and dozens of Wers had just disappeared after running through town causing such a stir. They had a base somewhere, Nathan was sure of it, so he'd contacted the head of the IT department. Marissa has purchased a building or buildings in preparation for this move. Her assistant, Bobby, may have done the purchasing. What can you do? Nathan asked her. Belina, a short, black werebear, smiled at him. Oh, we can do a lot, sir. Nathan shook his head. No, don't call me sir. I'm not your boss. This is only temporary. And what does a lot mean? We've already confiscated their computers, the ones in their offices as well as in their apartments located here. We've already discovered that Marissa had an apartment outside of headquarters. Matt has sent someone to investigate, and they'll bring up any technology they find. Have you found anything yet? Belina shook her head. We've only had the computers for about half an hour. As soon as we find something, I'll call you directly. It may take some time. Both of them were techies, very good at computers. Bobby's, for example, had a ton of safety parameters, documents and codes and passwords and so on. We're having to break each code individually. Marissa's is the same way, though not nearly as much. I'm not at all surprised by that, Nathan commented. Thank you, Belina. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. I sure couldn't do all that shit. Belina said, That's my job, boss. She cringed. Sorry. I know you aren't the official boss, but you are for now. Don't know what to call you. Just Nathan, please. He responded with a small smile. She winked at him and walked out. He looked at Lucy. This is completely insane. I'm no leader. Lucy smiled understandingly at him. I think you'll do a fantastic job, Nathan. I know you don't want it, but you'd be very good at it. You think so? I do. He leaned back in the chair and looked at her, the woman he loved. His blue eyes were sad, but having her here made it easier. What do you think about the idea of integration? Her opinion was more important than any other now. Lucy's expression was pensive. It's a great idea. The Wers here should never have agreed to go into hiding. Humans know we exist. It's stupid for them to pretend like we aren't living here. I've never understood it. I've just done my job. But I always thought it was stupid. When the head told me about his plans with the mayor to begin integration, I was all for helping in any way I could. And now you'll be able to help get it going, Lucy said. She rose, walked around the desk, and sat in his lap. She wrapped her arms around his neck as he placed his around her waist. You know, if you become the head, if you're elected, you could make that happen. Nathan had begun shaking his head as soon as she said, the head. I don't want that, Lucy. He offered me Marissa's position first, and I told him no because I hate the idea of being locked in the office all the time, dealing with all the politics and bullshit. That's not me. Lucy nodded her understanding. The head offered that position to you for a reason, Nathan. He believed you could do it. I know. Nathan laid his forehead on hers. I'm going to miss him so much. I know. Baby, I know. Lucy soothed, running her hand through his hair and kissing his nose. You haven't had time to begin grieving yet. A knock sounded on the door. Lucy sat up and rolled her eyes at him, eliciting a small chuckle from him. Lucy rose as the door opened and Sarah walked in, an apologetic look on her face. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir. Nathan looked at Lucy and rolled his eyes. She covered her mouth with her hand to keep from giggling. I've called each member of the council like you asked. They will be here in the conference room by 7. I've called the caterers to bring up a dinner for all of you. I hope that's okay. Of course, Sarah. I'll be ready, Nathan said to her. He watched as her eyes drifted throughout her speech to the bloodstains on the floor. He hadn't thought to cover them. Sarah, why don't you go home? You've had an awful day. No, sir, I'm fine. I'll be here to assist you until you no longer need me. Sarah stared at him as if daring him to argue. Lucy liked Sarah. Sarah, you are the strongest person I know. Sarah shifted her attention to her. Thank you, Lucy. I feel the same way about you. She returned her attention to Nathan. Sir, there is complete chaos out there right now. So many are petitioning for a nomination to be head. And what's worse, the head's plan for integration has been leaked. Everyone knows, and strong supporters and detractors are coming forward. Shit. Precisely. Sarah shook her great curls. She'd aged so much today. This morning, she'd looked 10 years younger than her almost 50 years. But now she looked exhausted. That council meeting can't happen too soon. Again, I agree. The sooner a new head is elected, the sooner we can calm all of this down. Sarah nodded her agreement and excused herself as the phone rang shrilly, interrupting their conversation. Lucy laid her hands on Nathan's shoulders and began kneading the stress out of his shoulders. He laid his hands on hers. I can't wait until we can go upstairs and shed the awfulness that has been this day. Lucy continued kneading his shoulders. Me too, babe. I'll head on up during the meeting, and by the time you're done, I'll have a bath drawn and a glass of wine waiting for you. How have I lived without you all this time? She grinned. I'm quickly making myself indispensable to you, my love. She bent and kissed his neck. He groaned. Oh, babe, you better stop that or I'm going to miss my meeting. My apologies, sir, she replied with a giggle. The door slammed open and Sarah rushed back in. Marissa is on Skype and wants to speak with you. Now. Nathan sat up straight and stared at her. He didn't move. He had to gather his thoughts before speaking to Marissa, so he didn't lose his temper and say all the things he wanted to say. Sarah, please call Matt and get him up here. Does this thing record? Of course. I'll set it to record and get Matt. Thank you. Nathan took a deep breath, took Lucy's hand and squeezed it, then stood and walked to the desk that held the head's computer, pulling her with him. He turned the screen on and clicked the Skype icon. Marissa's face popped up. Ah, hello, Nathan. I wasn't sure you'd have the balls to speak to me. Marissa smirked at him. And look who's with you. How are your wounds, sweet cheeks? Lucy didn't answer. Her face remained impassive even though inside she was seething with fury. She was grateful for her dark skin. The telltale signs of anger couldn't be seen. She squeezed Nathan's hand and stepped out of the frame. Your conversation is with me, Marissa. Of course it is. And we have so much to talk about, don't we? I'm sure you have a lot to say. Marissa nodded. Someone handed her a cup of coffee. She stirred it a moment, biding her time. When she spoke, her voice was soft and evil. How's William? Nathan rolled his eyes at her, hiding his real feelings. He refused to lose his temper. Marissa, is this conversation going to have a purpose other than proving you're a heartless bitch? I already know that, so it would be a waste of my time and yours. Marissa murmured something to someone out of sight. Have you watched the news today? Not all day, no. I have things that must be handled. Thanks to you, Nathan retorted. I saw enough footage of you and your entourage galloping through town. Has no one been appointed to keep the temporary head informed? That place is going to hell and it's only been a few hours. How sad. Nathan pursed his lips. Again, what is the purpose of this phone call? Matt walked in, a serious expression on his face. He handed Nathan a piece of paper. On it was a report about the wers who had been sighted all over town all day, causing panic among the humans. So far no one had been killed, but several people had been injured. Wers who were not involved in the rebellion had shifted to help several people, but rather than helping, this seemed to have encouraged the panic. A handful of wers had been shot, but again, none had been seriously injured or killed. Marissa giggled prettily. I'm assuming from the look on your face you've finally received a report. Nathan looked at her, his face clear, but the hatred in his face showed. I suppose this is your doing? Of course. The mayor's office announced the existence of the guard and explained their duties. Today's events, which will continue, show that the guard no longer has control. Marissa spread her hands in victory. Enter Marissa and her new group. New group? Yes, the guard is antiquated and has steadily been losing power over the last decade. I'm establishing a new government for this city, one that will rule over the humans who have ruled over us for so long. Nathan shook his head. Marissa, you sound like the evil villain from a superhero movie. The world doesn't work like that. It will, or the humans will leave this city. My wers, and I want a city entirely populated by wers, will take over and make their lives completely miserable. They'll run. Well, thanks for the heads up, Marissa, but I've got to go. Business to handle, you know. Nathan dismissed her, knowing it would anger her. He was right. He reached for the mouse to close the screen. I will kill any human I find after I take over. Nathan sat back in his chair. I thought you said you'd let them leave. I lied. I'll set a date, I'd say about a month from now. If there are humans left in this city, I'll have them slaughtered. Marissa ended the conversation. Nathan's wide eyes met Lucy's, then Matt's. What the hell are we supposed to do with that? Nathan had gone upstairs briefly with Lucy to grab a shower and change into nicer clothes. After a pep talk and a kiss that held the promise of a good evening later, Nathan headed down to the conference room to meet with the council. He had sat in on a handful of council meetings before, at the request of the head, but he'd never really paid a lot of attention. He hadn't needed to. The guard had spent the last decade in peace, with very few major upsets. Sarah met him at the door and gestured him inside. The meeting was still half an hour away. The caterers were setting up the buffet for dinner, and the delicious aromas reminded Nathan he had not eaten since breakfast. He cleared his throat as two more council members stepped inside, a werecat and a werebear. He greeted them and gestured for them to make themselves a plate, explaining that he'd like to enjoy the food before the conversation started. By 7, all the council members had arrived and were eating. Nathan dug into the food on his plate, grateful that Sarah had arranged for such a sumptuous meal. Idle chatter about non-essential information rumbled around the room. The council members all knew Nathan and liked him, were content to have him as temporary leader. He'd learned a lot from the head, and he'd make good decisions based on the discussions that took place in this room. Nathan looked around the table at the men and women who were his friends, and had been friends with the head. Each set of 3 wers sat together, and although most of the time the species agreed with their own, sometimes they argued before a decision could be made. He thought the council was the best way to run a government entity, which the guard was. When he was sure everyone had finished their meals, he rose and cleared his throat for attention. Ladies, gentlemen, I'd like to begin with a moment of silence for the head. He died before his time. All heads bowed, and silence reigned for about 30 seconds. One of the werebears sniffed and wiped his face with a napkin, while a werecat allowed her tears to slip silently down her face. Thank you. Part of this evening's meeting will be to discuss the funeral arrangements that will need to be made. Several of the wers nodded. A werewolf raised his hand and waited to be acknowledged. Nathan, I hope I'm not stepping on toes, but we've got to address the Marissa thing before anything else. I agree. The first thing on the agenda is electing the new head. It hasn't been done in quite some time, but circumstances being what they are, we need to get the nominations in quickly. Do you think it can be done in 3 days? Nathan looked around the table as the council murmured. After all had agreed, Nathan nodded and continued. Let's plan to meet again in 3 days to make the nominations. How soon after that can we hold the vote? An older werewolf answered. The last time we held nominations, we gave the candidates a week. I'd say we should stick to that. A murmur of assent sounded. Sarah, who was taking copious notes on her laptop, made a note of the dates nominations were due and when the vote would take place. She was in charge of getting the information out to the wers of the city about when and where to vote. Soon that would be Lucy's job. With that decided, we also need to discuss Marissa's plans. She contacted me via Skype today. Nathan summarized his conversation with Marissa, not leaving out a thing. Several of the wers in the room began to grumble as he spoke. She's a murderer. She and her pack of deviants caused the deaths of 7 wers, including the head. She needs to be brought to justice. A werbear demanded. What are the plans to capture Marissa? Another wer asked. The IT department has her computers as well as those of her assistant, who is working with her. They must have a base somewhere in town, but we have no idea of the location. We're hoping to find her quickly, but it will take time, Nathan reported. Several of the wers nodded in agreement. The werecat who'd spoken a moment ago pointed out, if she is caught, the punishment for her crimes is execution. As it should be, the werbear affirmed. What about this new group she's planning? What does that mean? Nathan looked at a lovely werbear. She thinks the guard is antiquated. She is dead set against the integration of wers into human society. She wants to rule the city, a city of nothing but wers. He hesitated a moment. She named a date a month from now. She plans to have rid the city of humans by then. Any human still in the city will be slaughtered. Gasps of shock escaped 3 of the wers at the table. A werewolf who had only been on the council for a few months said, "We need to find her. I'm putting feelers out all over the city. Human and wer. We all need to do so. Use your sources. She's gone mad. The human government won't allow that kind of behavior. They'll send the National Guard in here and wipe out wers, regardless of what side they're on." Nathan hadn't thought of that yet, but he knew the man was accurate in his description of the reaction the US government would have. He shook his head in exasperation. Okay, everybody, get your feelers out. I've already got my sources scouring for information, and I feel like the IT guys will find something soon. In the meantime, we get the guard headquarters cleaned up and continue business as usual. The older werewolf spoke. If I may, I'd like to volunteer to plan the head's funeral. He was one of my closest friends, and he has no family. I'd like the honor of planning his final farewell. Smiles around the table answered his request in the affirmative. After a quick reminder to be back in 3 days with the nominations, the meeting ended.
Chapter 6. Nathan spoke to everyone before they left, reassuring them that he had it under control until the new head was elected. He said goodnight to Sarah and trudged to the elevator. He pushed the button and slumped against the back wall, rubbing a hand over his face in exhaustion. He was grateful he'd eaten. He had absolutely no desire to cook anything. And then he remembered as the elevator bumped to a stop that Lucy was waiting for him in his apartment. He stepped out of the elevator with a bounce in his gait. He hurried to his door and unlocked it. Inside his usually staid apartment, Lucy had created a haven. The lights were dimmed and the place was spotless. He smelled a sweet odor, chocolate perhaps, coming from the kitchen, and in the back of his mind he wondered if he'd ever actually used his oven. He looked around and wondered where he was supposed to go.
Hi there. Unfortunately, we've had to take this steamy scene out as it's against YouTube's terms of service.
If you don't want to miss out on love scenes for this and other stories, check the description and join our inner circle via Romancely Audio Velvet. Warning, things between the couples get super hot, and it's not for the faint-hearted.
If you're already a member, the love scene reference is Her Shifter Boss, Chapter 6, Love Scene 2. Okay, back to the story.
Lucy rolled over and reached for Nathan, but he wasn't there. The sun was trying to sneak past the curtains he had hung, but the beams couldn't pierce the jet-black solar panels he'd chosen. She rolled her eyes. The man was a vampire, not a werewolf, she thought. As she lay there, she listened carefully for any sound to indicate where he was. The kitchen, she surmised when she heard a cabinet close in what he probably thought was a quiet close. She smiled, threw the covers off, and padded to the kitchen naked. She peeked in and watched him as he prepared pancakes for the two of them. Coffee was already brewing, and a stack of 3 pancakes waited for the rest on a plate. Nathan was nude as well, and she admired the way his ass muscles bunched as he walked from one place to the next. She whistled softly, and he turned. The smile he bestowed upon her left her breathless. "Good morning, my love," he murmured as he put his arms around her and kissed her forehead. "You slept well?" "So well," she said. He moved away from her to flip the pancake in the pan. "Smells delicious. Go sit down. I'll bring you breakfast and coffee in just a minute," he ordered her. "Can I help?" "No, you cannot," he told her and pointed toward the table. He brought her a cup of coffee, the sugar, and milk. "While I work, I can tell you about the meeting." "Okay. How did it go?" "Well, we're meeting the day after tomorrow to collect the nominations. Then a week later we'll hold the vote for the new head." Nathan put the last pancake on a plate, moved one from the other plate to that one, and set the plates of pancakes on the table. He went to the cabinet for syrup and put it in the microwave for 15 seconds to warm it. On his way to the table, he grabbed the butter. Lucy smiled at him as he sat down. He leaned over and kissed her. She waited. He opened the butter and reached for he'd forgotten utensils. She laughed as he rolled his eyes at himself and rose to get a knife for the butter and 2 forks. "You knew I'd forgotten and didn't say anything," he said as he shook his head. "What a terrible girlfriend you are. Hush your mouth." It was funny, she admonished playfully as she watched him slather a huge slab of butter onto his pancakes. He handed her the knife and soaked his pancakes with syrup. "Do you even taste the actual pancake?" "Oh God, yes," he replied. He cut off a hunk and shoved it in his mouth, closing his eyes in ecstasy. "This is almost as good as making love to you, Lucy." She playfully slapped his arm, pretending offense at his remark. "Jerk." "Love you, honey," he replied with a wink. She rolled her eyes at him. "So what about Marissa?" "We're doing what we can to find her. All the council members have agreed to put the word out that we're trying to find her, as if it's some big secret. They're worried about her threat to start this new group. That's why they agreed to get the nominations so quickly." "Does she have a chance of being successful?" Nathan mused over her question as he chewed his pancakes. "You know, I'm not really sure." "Is it possible?" "Yes, if we can't get the guard under control quickly enough to assuage the wers and the humans' fears about all this nonsense." Lucy opened her mouth to reply when there was a knock on the door. They looked at each other. "Are you expecting someone?" Nathan shook his head as he rose. "Nope, but now that I'm acting head, who knows what this might be." As he walked to his bedroom to grab some pants, he called, "Be right there." Lucy followed him and put his robe on. She walked back to the kitchen as he answered the door. She sat down to eat her pancakes when she heard a familiar voice. She jerked up from the table and hastily moved into the living room. "Mom," she gasped. "What the hell are you doing here?" Nathan stepped back and let Marianne into the apartment. "And what's more, how the hell did you know your daughter was in my apartment?" Marianne arched an eyebrow at her daughter, then at this man. "My question is, what are you doing in this man's apartment in that state of undress?" Lucy rolled her eyes. "Mother, really? That's why you're here? Because I'm having sex with my boyfriend?" Marianne smiled. "Oh dear, I'm happy for you. But really, you could have dressed. It's 7:30. I had no idea you were coming, Lucy defended, then shook her head. Wait! How the hell did you know I was even here? All I told you about Nathan was his name. Marianne moved further into the room and looked around. Nathan had stepped back and was leaning against the bar, watching the conversation with interest. All I needed, dear. All I needed. She looked back at Lucy as she sat gingerly on the couch. Just because I was banished from this fair city doesn't mean I didn't retain my friends here. I have plenty of sources telling me what I need to know. Fantastic, Lucy said dryly. She looked at Nathan, who smiled and shrugged. Lucy's shoulder drooped. Mom, this is Nathan, my boyfriend. Nathan, this is my mother, Marianne. Nathan moved forward with his hand outstretched to shake hers. Hello, Marianne. May I call you Marianne? It's a pleasure to meet you. Of course you may, and it's a pleasure to meet you as well, Marianne replied, shaking his hand from her seat on the couch. Enough with the pleasantries. Lucy, you need to come home. Lucy snorted. Okay. You do realize I'm a grown woman and have been making my own decisions for years? Yes. Do you realize the chaos the city is about to be thrown into thanks to that bitch Marissa? It could mean war. Nathan shook his head. No, ma'am. We're working hard at the guard to make sure that doesn't happen. Now Marianne snorted. The guard? If my sources are correct, Marissa was with the guard when she stirred up all this nonsense. This city is going to be very dangerous for wers if the humans decide the guard isn't handling the problem. Lucy would be safer at home. Mom, I took the job at the guard. I start today, apparently, what with all that's going on. I don't need to come home, nor do I plan to. Lucy, you haven't lived here when there is unrest. Nathan, have you? Nathan nodded his head. Nothing to this extreme, no. Precisely. You do not understand the dangers. Marianne shifted her gaze to Lucy. Please at least think about coming for a long visit. I can't leave right now, Mom, Lucy answered. She walked to the couch, sat next to her mother, and took her hand. I belong here now. Marianne nodded resignedly. Damn it. You're just too much like me. Lucy laughed. Stay here for a few days. We'll go back to my apartment to stay, don't worry, Lucy said when her mother lifted her eyebrows and looked around Nathan's apartment. We can hang out, see the sights, blah blah, when I'm not at work. I'd like that, but I have to go to the guard's headquarters to ask formal permission to be in the city. I was banished, remember? Currently, I'm acting head until a new one is elected next week. I can grant you that permission. But we do have to go to the office to make it official, Nathan explained. Marianne smiled at him and teased, I like him already, Lucy. A man with power. Oh good lord, Mother, what about Dad? Harmless flirtation is nothing for your father to worry about. Lucy rolled her eyes. Let me get dressed and we'll run to my apartment so I can put on some decent clothes. You mean fresh clothes, don't you, dear? Her mother inquired. Stop pretending you weren't a slut before Dad came along, Lucy smirked. If you were still a child, I'd spank your ass for that little comment. But since you're an adult, I'll just make you pay for lunch. Lucy laughed as she walked out of the room. Deal. Marianne turned her attention to Nathan, her expression serious. How much does Marissa hate my daughter? I know they fought after she killed the head and injured Lucy. Nathan's eyebrows rose in surprise. You are well informed. I may live in the country, but I have always known what's happening here, Marianne assured him. How dangerous is Marissa? Specifically to Lucy? Not very. But in general? Incredibly dangerous. She's even more dangerous because she has many wers who think she's right. What exactly does she want? Why do I get the feeling you know the answer to that question already? Marianne grinned conspiratorially. Because I do. But I want to hear what you have to say. Nathan narrowed his eyes at her. The woman would be a dangerous enemy, the perfect person to fight against Marissa, in his opinion. An idea was forming in his mind. But he put it away and answered her. Marissa wants a city that is filled with only wers, completely devoid of any humans. Marianne nodded, her lips pursed in thought. Yes, that is what I heard. Nathan, I'd like to talk with you about this later. Nathan smiled at her as Lucy walked out of the bedroom, dressed and ready to go. I'd like that, Marianne. You'd like what? Lucy asked, looking from her boyfriend to her mother. Your mother wants to join us at the head's funeral this afternoon. After, we'll go to dinner to raise a toast in his honor. Marianne's expression hadn't changed when Nathan included her in plans they hadn't made, something Nathan noted. She smiled at her daughter. I hope that's okay with you? Yes, Mom. That way you and Nathan can get to know each other, Lucy exclaimed. But did you even know the head? Actually, yes. He and I were friends. He tried to help me when the former head banished me. It didn't work, but my life was better in the country anyway. Then it's settled. Lucy leaned into Nathan and kissed him chastely on the lips. We'll meet you at the office then. I'll see you there. Love you, he murmured to her. Marianne, it was nice to meet you. I look forward to getting to know you better. Marianne smiled. You too, Nathan.
Chapter 7. Nathan, Lucy, and Marian rode together to the head's funeral. All wore black, as was the custom, and all carried their favorite flower to lay on his tomb. Unlike in the country, where the werewolf custom was to burn the bodies of their dead, the guard owned a tomb specifically for the heads who had passed away. The funeral was to be held outside of the tomb. The werewolf council member, Emmett, who had volunteered to plan the funeral, had sent word out that anyone who wished to speak to commemorate the head's memory would do so from the stairs leading up to the door of the tomb. When Nathan, Lucy, and Marian walked up, he stood on the steps of the tomb and waited for everyone to gather around. He raised his arms and called out to quiet the large crowd who had come to pay their respects. Ladies and gentlemen, first let me thank you for coming today. The man we are saying goodbye to, the head, William Green, passed before his time under horrible circumstances. He was a good man, a good werewolf who did not deserve such a terrible death. We loved him, and that's why we are here. The old man stopped for a moment to collect himself. His voice had broken when he'd said the word loved. He cleared his throat and continued. If you would like to speak, please step forward. We would love to hear some happy memories of this well-respected man. Several wers stepped forward to speak. Some of the memories evoked laughter among the crowd, while others caused sniffles. The most beautiful speech, the most heartfelt, was delivered by Sarah, who had been the head's secretary for his entire career as head. Rumors had thrived that the two of them had been in love, and though Nathan did not believe the head had felt more than brotherly affection for her, the speech she delivered was one straight from the heart. She had loved him. No eye was dry when she walked down the steps, supported gently by a young man Nathan did not know. Emmett stepped up to invite any other speakers to come forward. He opened his mouth, but a howl interrupted. The crowd of people turned simultaneously to see what werewolf had chosen that inappropriate moment to howl. A crowd of wers, led by a sleek werecat, stood on the hill that rose above the cemetery, glaring down on the large group honoring the man their leader had murdered. Lucy felt Nathan's arm tense as he watched the werecat, flanked by a werewolf and a werebear, lope down the hill and into the crowd. The crowd parted to let them pass, and the trio ascended the steps of the tomb. The older werewolf held his ground, shaking in fury. "You murderer! You evil beast!" Emmett cried angrily. He gestured to the crowd. "No one wants you and your group of mutinous bastards here. Leave." Marissa, still in her werecat form, watched him curiously as he spoke. She moved towards him slowly. He watched her warily. Nathan broke away from Lucy as he realized what Marissa was about to do. He sprinted for the front, but was too late. The crowd gasped when her claws cut the man's chest deeply. Blood splashed on the steps of the tomb. Emmett's body tumbled down the steps and landed at Nathan's feet. Nathan knelt beside him. He wouldn't die from the wounds, but they were deep. Emmett shifted into a gray werewolf so the wounds would heal more easily. Many in the crowd screamed. Some moved forward while others tried to move away. Marissa's band of wers howled and roared at the sight of blood. Marissa shifted and smiled her evil smile at Nathan. He surged forward, but the werewolf and werebear moved to block him. "Marissa, what the hell is wrong with you?" Nathan yelled. The crowd silenced again to listen to the exchange. "Why are you here?" "Hello, Nathan." She looked away from him and addressed the crowd. "Hello, wers. I've come to issue an invitation." "An invitation to become a traitor?" a voice yelled. "You vile bitch," another voice called. Marissa smiled beautifully at her haters. "Wers, hear me out before you judge." A group near the front moved to join Nathan. Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Ladies and gentlemen, please do not imagine you will win should you choose to attack." She gestured to the hill above them and around them. "My wers are poised to attack. You will have far more casualties than I will." Nathan stepped on the first step and addressed the crowd. "This is not the time or place for bloodshed. She is trying to start a war." He turned back to Marissa. "You've caused your scene, you've made your point. Now get the hell out of here." Marissa laughed, and again she addressed the crowd. "My invitation to you is to join my group. We will create a new city, a city of only wers. We've been in hiding long enough. Wers deserve a place of their own. Join us, and we will live here in a city of wers. We will create a paradise." Murmured conversations rumbled through the crowd. None who had witnessed Marissa's unwarranted attack on Emmett would join her. Sarah stepped away from the crowd and yelled, "Marissa, no one here will join you. Leave, and take your minions with you." Marissa shook her head as if she pitied the poor souls who refused her offer. "Those who do not join me will either be banished from the city or killed. Choose wisely, wers." She shifted and leapt off the steps. She swiped at several wers as she passed, as did the werewolf and werecat. Nathan yelled after her, "You will not succeed, Marissa." At the top of the hill, surrounded by her small army, Marissa shifted again. She looked down at Nathan. "You'll be the first to die." The wers around her roared and howled in appreciation of her statement. Marissa smiled and waved haughtily, shifted, and led her group away. After assuring Emmett had been taken care of, Nathan found Lucy and Marion in the crowd. "I have to go to headquarters. The council approached me while we were helping Emmett. They want to meet now. I'll come. There were humans as well as wers here. We've got to make a statement for the press." "Marissa is causing so many problems," Lucy said. They turned and began to walk toward Nathan's car. Lucy looked at her mother. "Mom, we can drop you at my apartment if you'd like. Actually, I'd like to come, if that's okay with Nathan. I talked to Sarah while at the funeral. She and I used to be friends before I left. I wouldn't mind helping her out." Nathan looked at Marion as they walked. "There won't be much to do. The council meetings are still open to the public, yes?" "Yes, you're more than welcome to join us," Nathan replied. He was silent on the car ride to headquarters. Marion's behavior bothered him. Lucy had told him she had no love for the guard since she'd been exiled. So why would she want to sit in on a council meeting? It would be an interesting one, yes, but why the sudden interest? Lucy had been watching him out of the corner of her eye. She could tell something was bothering him. Her mother's behavior had also struck her as odd. But there was no discussing anything with either of them at that moment. Stuck in the car. She would have to wait. All but 3 of the council members were already present in the conference room when Nathan walked in. Emmett was missing, as were the other 2 werewolves. Everyone milled about, chatting about nothing while they waited. Marian sat in a corner talking to Sarah, their heads close. If Nathan didn't know better, he would assume they were plotting something. Nathan continued his observation of the room. Very few words were present other than the council members, which he found strange. Normally, the candidates were told to be at the meeting. Lucy brought him a bottle of water, squeezed his hand briefly, and walked over to sit near her mother. He smiled at her when she faced him. She gave him a thumbs up for support. When the 2 werewolves arrived, everyone wanted to know if Emmett was all right before they started the meeting. Emmett walked in behind them, bulky bandages visible beneath his shirt. He assured everyone he was fine and gestured for the meeting to begin. Nathan signaled for Sarah to join him and open the meeting. All right, everyone, let's get down to business. After today's excitement, I feel it's important to have the vote as soon as possible. Would anyone object if we had the vote in 3 days rather than a week? A few grumbled responses in the affirmative cleared that up. Nathan nodded. Good. With Marissa's very public threat, we've got to get a head chosen so we can begin handling this issue. Has every species chosen a candidate? Again, several nods in the affirmative. All right, we'll begin with the werebears. A portly gentleman rose and announced, "We nominate our fellow council member, Edward Hall." A round of polite applause erupted from the council members. Nathan looked at the man. "Edward, do you accept?" Edward rose and said, "Yes, I accept. Thank you." Nathan turned to the group of werecats. "Who have you chosen?" A young woman stood with a smile on her face. "We've chosen you, Nathan." Nathan's mouth fell open as thunderous applause shook the room. He looked at Lucy, who beamed at him with pride in her eyes. The young woman spoke over the applause. "Nathan, do you accept the nomination?" Nathan was speechless. He didn't want this, had never wanted it. He didn't want to make this choice spur of the moment. He looked at Lucy again. She smiled at him, her head tilted. She knew he didn't want it. "Nathan, I guess I accept." Another round of applause. Nathan felt cold, but shook his head and continued the nomination process in a much quieter voice. "Werewolves, have you chosen a candidate?" "We have. We nominate Sarah Wells as our candidate." Nathan smiled brilliantly. Surely Sarah would win the vote. She knew the office inside and out, could handle any situation thrown at her. She rose, her face stern, and Nathan's happiness. She was going to refuse. "Sarah," he said, almost pleadingly, "do you accept the nomination?" Sarah looked at him. "No." The room erupted with voices, shocked by her answer. No one in the history of the Guard had refused the nomination. She held up her hand. "But if you'll let me speak, please." "People, let her speak." Nathan called to quiet the room. Everyone stared at her, waiting. Sarah cleared her throat. "First of all, I am honored by your nomination, but I am not made to be the head. I am his or her secretary, a position I think is equally important. I want to remain the secretary." Several of the council members nodded at the logic in her words. The head would never have been so successful without Sarah behind him, and everyone knew it. The head had even known it. "Werewolves, do you have an alternate candidate?" Sarah cleared her throat and raised her hand. "If I may, I have an alternate in mind." The werewolves nodded for her to continue. "I would like for Marianne to take my place as candidate." Lucy gasped. Nathan narrowed his eyes at Marianne, and the room was deadly silent. Eyes met across the room, but no one spoke their thoughts. One of the werewolves rose. "I'm sorry to dispute you, Sarah, because I have a lot of respect for you. But Marianne was banished years ago for attacking a human." Emmett spoke. "As the oldest member in here, let me explain something. He paused to make sure everyone was listening. Marianne attacked a criminal who was later killed by his own men. She was railroaded for that particular crime. So you support her nomination? One of the werebears asked. Not only do I support the nomination, I make a motion to change our candidate to Marianne, Emmett said forcefully. He looked at his companions and raised his bushy eyebrows. Marianne is the perfect person to choose for head. And I mean no disrespect, Marianne, but she thinks like Marissa. She'll be able to catch that bitch. She'll make a good political leader as well. When it's time to start this integration thing the head was so excited about. Murmurs of assent rose from the werebears, even from their candidate. Marianne hadn't lived in the city for decades, but everyone in this room knew her. Most liked her. The werecats were reticent, however. They wanted Nathan as the head, even if he didn't want it. Nathan looked at Marianne, who hadn't spoken as they argued about her nomination. She met his eyes and smiled, and it clicked why she was here. For this reason. She'd waited for 3 decades to come back so she could take over. And in his heart, he knew she was the right choice. He raised his hand for silence, his eyes not leaving her face. Marianne, do you accept the nomination? Marianne rose and met the eyes of every person in the room. Her reputation was slowly being solidified. The story of her nomination would become legend. I accept.
Chapter 8. Over the next week, the 3 candidates spoke to wers around the city in small-scale campaigns to become the next head. Nathan had his ear to the ground, listening to rumors about who was the favored candidate. Because Marianne had Sarah's help, who apparently had contacts all over the city, she seemed to be in the lead. He was happy about that. He felt that Marianne, although a bit sneaky, would make a good head, a strong leader. And he felt that she would be able to get this Marissa crap under control. On the day of the vote, he woke early next to Lucy. She was snuggled up against him, one arm over his waist. He could feel her breasts against his back and he hardened at the thought of their lovemaking the night before. He could hear her breathing deeply in her sleep, so even though he wanted to roll over her and kiss her, he didn't. He didn't want to wake her. He lay there a few more minutes, waiting for her to wake up or his alarm to go off, whichever happened first. A few minutes later, she began to stir, squeezing him around the waist before rolling onto her back and stretching. He rolled over and put his hand on her stomach, admiring her beautifully dark skin as she yawned spectacularly. She finally opened her eyes and looked at him, a slow smile sneaking across her face. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning, sweet lady," he said back and kissed her gently on the lips. She batted him away playfully. "EW. I have morning breath. No kissing yet." He laughed at her. "Your morning breath is ambrosia to me, my love." "Ugh. You're such a dork in the mornings," she grumbled. She was not a morning person, he'd learned quickly. She rolled out of bed and padded to the bathroom. He rolled over and watched her amply sexy ass as she walked away from him. He let out a wolf whistle and wiggled his eyebrows at her when she looked at him. He threw the covers back and called out to her, "Today is the vote. I bet your mom is freaking out." She was putting her hair up in preparation to climb into the shower when he joined her in the bathroom. "I doubt it. Mom doesn't get freaked out about anything. She was one of the leaders back home as well, so this is just a bigger position for her." He was brushing his teeth. After spitting, her turned to her and said, "I think she has a good chance of winning." Lucy looked at him again. "You do?" "I do, yes. Sarah has really been pulling for her, talking to everyone. And believe me, she knows everyone." Lucy tilted her head. She stuck her hand under the water in the shower to make sure it was warm enough. She stepped in and let the water run over her body. She grabbed her loofah and soaked up as she thought about what it would mean if her mother was the head of the guard. Either really awesome or really awful, she thought to herself with a grimace. Since her mother had been nominated, Lucy had seen a new side of her, a stronger side, almost frightening in her strength. She wondered if her father knew about this side of her and if he liked it. Her mother's exile had officially ended, and now she was set to be the most important one in the city. She was grateful she'd gotten the job as media liaison before this. She didn't want people to think her mother had hired her just because she was her daughter.
Oh no, another love scene had to be taken out due to YouTube's policies.
If you haven't already, sign up to the premium Romancely Audio Velvet membership to get love scenes for all stories. 18 plus only, this naughtiness is strictly for adults.
Link to join this exclusive club is in the description.
If you're already an exclusive member, the love scene references, Her Shifter Boss, Chapter 8, Love Scene 3.
Signed up? Good, now back to the story.
After the very sexy shower they'd shared, Lucy and Nathan dressed and left for headquarters together. Nathan could tell Lucy was anxious, so he took her hand in his and lifted it to his lips as they rode the elevator down to the lobby to cast their votes. She smiled gratefully at him but quickly returned her attention to the mirrored door. Voting had begun at 8 that morning. Wers were lined up outside to cast their votes for the new head. Several called out to Nathan as they walked towards the voting area. He waved and slowed his pace, though he didn't stop. Security had been put on high alert to avoid any shenanigans caused by Marissa or her band of Wers. Nathan and Lucy looked at each other as they passed, wondering if that man was on Marissa's side, or if that woman had been at headquarters when she'd killed the head. They continued to the voting booths to cast their votes. Nathan had already decided to vote for Marianne and knew that Lucy would also vote for her mother. He squeezed her hand as she stepped into the voting booth. He voted as well, then they hopped on the elevator and rode it down to the offices. The council members were in attendance. As soon as voting closed for the day, they were responsible for counting the votes as a group. Only the council members were allowed in the room during this process, and an announcement would be made as soon as they finished. Lucy's first task as media liaison was to write a statement announcing the new head. She had several questions about what exactly to write: a news report for a news anchor? A newspaper? She wasn't sure exactly how this worked yet. Don't worry about all that just yet, Nathan reassured her. Once the head is elected, he or she will tell you where to send the statement. I'm thinking, now that we're public, so to speak, the statement will go to the news stations as well as newspapers. I think it should. I mean, the mayor wants this integration to go through. The best way to begin is to give people information, Lucy commented. I agree, but that will be up to the new head, Nathan said. But I have a feeling the new head will agree with us wholeheartedly. Lucy glanced at him, but his face was passive as he greeted the council members who waited in the conference room. Refreshments had been laid out for them since they would be there for most of the day. Nathan formally introduced Lucy to the council members as the new media liaison, and they were happy to meet her. They knew her as Marianne's daughter, but no one commented on that. Nathan turned to her after the chit-chat had subsided. Would you like to see your office? I get an office. Of course, he laughed. You'll need one. Media liaison is a full-time position, especially when the integration measures are put into place. At precisely 5 o'clock, the voting booths were closed. Anyone who hadn't voted by that point wasn't going to have the opportunity. No protesters, no violence, no shenanigans of any kind had taken place throughout the day to prevent voting. As far as anyone at headquarters knew, Marissa nor any of her associates had come to cast a vote for the new head. However, they couldn't be sure of that. No one knew exactly who made up Marissa's ranks of rebels. At 5:15, the council members began counting votes behind the closed, locked door of the conference room. The 3 candidates and their families and friends waited in the comfortable lobby for results. Everyone chatted amicably, no one harbored negative feelings. Whichever of the three won, it seemed like the other two would be fine with the results. Lucy and Sarah sat with Marianne, idly chatting. Lucy asked her mother, "So you didn't tell Dad about this at all?" "Nope." Marianne giggled like a teenager. "I wanted it to be a surprise. He thinks I've stayed this long because you and I are having so much fun." Lucy rolled her eyes at her mother. "Mom, are you sure he's going to be happy about this? If you win, you'll have to move back here." "Is he willing to do that?" "Let me tell you a little secret," Marianne said, leaning forward and whispering so only Lucy and Sarah could hear her. "I've always wanted to come back to be a member of the Guard. I was bitter at first about the banishment, but I understand now. Your father knows I miss being here, and I honestly believe he'll be more than happy to come here with me." Marianne hesitated, a smile playing on her lips. "Besides, if I win and he hates the idea, you and Nathan will be with me to convince him otherwise. If I don't win, you'll be there with me to console me." Marianne's not-so-subtle hint that she expected not only Lucy but Nathan to come home with her amused Lucy. "I had already made arrangements to join you on the trip home." Marianne clapped her hands in joy. "Oh, good. Regardless of all this, your father will be so glad to see you." The door to the conference room opened. Nathan, as acting head, had been in the room while the votes were counted. He stepped out with a smile on his face. He looked around, met everyone's eyes in the room, and made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, the votes have been counted. The new head of the Guard is none other than Marianne Trisk." The room erupted into congratulations and cheers. Marianne put her hand over her heart and grinned broadly. Lucy and Sarah threw their arms around her simultaneously in a spontaneous group hug. Everyone moved forward to shake her hand and congratulate her. A speech was called for, and Marianne, with Nathan's hand as help, climbed onto a table to speak. "Thank you so much. I don't have a speech prepared, but I will say this. I plan to work hard for wers all over the city." Marianne smiled as her conclusion. Lucy watched as another were helped her mother down, the council member who had been nominated and lost. He patted her on the back and said he couldn't wait to work with her. Everyone was genuinely happy her mother had won. Lucy was too, but she was terribly worried about how her father would handle it. Nathan received a text message the next morning from Marianne. He and Lucy needed to be at the council meeting this afternoon at 3, Lucy to discuss the press release, and Nathan for unspecified reasons. He walked into the kitchen where Lucy was making breakfast. "Did you get a text from your mom?" She glanced at him as she whisked the eggs, ham, cheese, bell pepper, and onion together to make omelets. As she poured the mixture into the pan, she replied, "My phone is in the other room. We're supposed to go to the council meeting this afternoon at 3. I knew that. Mom and the council want to discuss the press release. I've already written it, but it may need some revising." She flipped the omelet. "Why do you have to be there?" "I don't know. I was hoping you did," Nathan answered. He grabbed some plates and a mug, refilled her coffee and made his own. "You're sure you don't know?" "Nathan, I don't know anything." Lucy put the omelet on a plate and cut it in half. She added the bagels she'd already toasted and walked with both plates to the table. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. "Sarah is ecstatic my mom won." "Yes, she is. I think she maneuvered some of that, don't you?" Lucy laughed. "Of course she did. She's pretty brilliant. And sneaky. Has there been any commotion from Marissa?" "None that I've heard about. I think she's waiting for the official announcement. That would make sense. Lucy rose. Are you finished? Nathan rose as well. Yep. Let's clean up tonight. I need to get down to the office. Just because I haven't heard anything doesn't mean there's nothing to hear. Lucy went straight to her office to put the finishing touches on the press release while Nathan found the head of security. Any news? He asked Matt once he'd found him. Matt looked up from the report he'd been reading. Nothing so far. We're sightings here and there across town, but no attacks or injuries to report. I guess no news is good news, Nathan murmured as he glanced at the security screens on the wall. But you know, it's making me antsy. Agreed, Matt mused. He stroked his salt and pepper beard with one hand. I'm ready for Marianne to take over. She'll give Marissa a run for her money. A woman to handle a woman is the best course of action. Nathan laughed. I have to admit that's probably true. We'd never figure out her plan, we don't think the way they do. No sir, and they don't think like we do. Matt nodded his head. That's why Marianne was a damn good choice. Nathan slapped Matt on the back. I'll catch you later, man. Lucy met her mother in the head's office before the council meeting. Marianne stood in the center of the room, looking around. When she heard her daughter's footsteps, she turned, the frown on her face lifting into a smile. You look like you belong here, Mom, Lucy said, a bit of surprise in her voice. Marianne looked down at the dove-gray pantsuit and white blouse she'd chosen for her first act as the new head. Her athletic figure filled it out beautifully, and she felt powerful in it. Her mocha skin, a shade lighter than her daughter's, was flattered by the gray and white combination. Her eyes shone with excitement. Thank you, sweetie. You look lovely for your first day as well, Marianne complimented her daughter. She walked over to her and put her arm around her. Together they looked at the bloodstain on the floor. I wish I'd known him better. I only knew him briefly. Nathan loved him. Lucy turned to her mother and adjusted her jacket. This is not the time to be all sad and depressing. You have a city to lead. Marianne paled just a little and chuckled quietly. Oh good Lord, what have I gotten myself into? Nothing you can't handle. Let's go, Lucy ordered her. She halted at the door, and Marianne nearly ran into her. I just thought of something. Do I have to call you Head? Or can I still call you Mom? Marianne rolled her eyes and just looked at her daughter. Lucy nodded with a sheepish grin. Okay, yeah. That was a stupid question. Lucy brought her laptop with her so she could read the press release to the group and adjust it as the council and head saw fit. Marianne carried nothing. Sarah had explained to her that she brought everything the head needed to every meeting, including an itinerary of all that needed to be addressed. She'd been grateful because she had no idea what she needed at the first meeting. They walked in together, and everyone was there waiting for them. Lucy stepped to the side when the council members and other attendees rose and applauded her mother. Marianne smiled and waved at them, mumbling her thanks modestly and quietly. She walked to the head of the table and sat down, gesturing for the others to follow her lead. I hope it's not this formal every time, she grinned at her peers, as she considered them equals rather than underlings and would make that clear the longer she led. Welcome, everybody. I hope you'll bear with me as I learn the ropes around here. You'll do just fine, one of the werewolves said with a smile. We're all here to help you adjust. First of all, I would prefer to be called Marianne rather than Head. A few gasps caused her to raise her hand. I understand that goes against tradition, but I'm not one to follow all the rules, as many of you remember. Several of the council members snickered at the reminder of her recently abolished banishment. Let's get started. Sarah, do you have the itinerary? Sarah handed it to her with a smile. When she didn't give one to the others, one of the werecats piped up. Sarah, do you have copies for everyone? Marianne interrupted. She does, but I have something I'd like to put on the table before you get your copies. Everyone nodded in agreement. We need a second in command, an official second, like a vice president, if you will, to prevent such circumstances as what happened when the previous head was murdered. Marissa was his right-hand woman, but did not have an official title. I think that's important. Nathan, who was sitting in the back next to Lucy, arched an eyebrow at the discussion. He looked at Lucy, who appeared to be listening with interest but nothing more. His stomach clenched as Marianne continued. I would like to offer my choice as second. Nathan. Marianne looked at him. All heads swiveled in his direction. Nathan, do you accept my offer? Everyone was silent, staring at Nathan as he made his decision. He didn't want to be in the office all the time, but as second, he would still have freedom to come and go, maybe not as much as he pleased, but still some freedom would be his. He looked at Lucy, who had gasped when her mother had said his name. She truly had no idea this was coming, he could tell. She grinned at him and nodded her head. She wanted him to take the position, but he knew she'd back him if he refused as well. After several moments of silence, he returned his gaze to Marianne and nodded. Marianne, I accept the offer. Cheers and applause echoed through the conference room, but Marianne quickly regained control of the meeting. Nathan, I'm honored you accepted. We'll discuss all that on our way to my home in the country this weekend. Nathan raised his eyebrows at her, then looked at Lucy, who whispered, We'll talk about it later. He shook his head with a grin on his face. Sarah, please pass the itineraries out. First on the list, Belina. I believe you have some good news, Marianne said, looking at the short woman who headed up the IT department. Belina rose and made her report. Yes, Marianne, I have excellent news. She addressed the room. After much digging in decoding and computer jargon, my team has finally found the location of Marissa's headquarters. Nathan sat up. This was good news indeed. With that knowledge, they would be able to possibly capture Marissa, thereby ending this ridiculous siege the city was under. His brain worked the entire rest of the meeting, conjuring up plans and dismissing the ones that wouldn't work. Marianne ended the council meeting without a decision on what to do with the information about Marissa's headquarters. She asked for another meeting the next Monday when she, Lucy, and Nathan would return from the country and expected to have a plan of action by that point. She and the council did agree, however, that Lucy's press release was perfect and should be sent to the major newspapers and news stations in town. Nathan stopped her in the hallway. I have a handful of ideas about what to do with this information, Marianne. We can spitball them while we're traveling. Marianne nodded. This is exactly why you need to be my second. We can discuss on the plane, but not once we get there. This is my last weekend in the country for who knows how long. I plan to enjoy it.
Chapter 9. Lucy dozed on the plane ride home while Marianne and Nathan discussed business. Nathan had some good ideas about how to handle Marissa, but Lucy had tuned them out soon after boarding. She was on vacation, as far as she was concerned. That bitch was not going to dominate her thoughts the entire trip. Lucy's main concern was her father. So many questions ran through her head. What would he say about her mother being elected head? Would he be willing to move without argument, as her mother claimed? What about Nathan? Would he like him? Approve of him? She shook her head. They were bringing a lot of baggage home with them, and she hoped her dad was able and willing to cope with it all. At the airport, Nathan had to rouse her from sleep with a gentle shake of her shoulder. She stretched and smiled at him, then rose to collect her things from the overhead compartment. Nathan still had her hand and looked at his own. He'd collected her bag for her. He's such a gentleman, Lucy thought as she pecked him on the cheek. He stepped back to let her go first, and they slowly made their way down the aisle and off the plane behind her mother. Lucy's father, Frank, was waiting out front. He rushed forward and enveloped both women in his huge arms. "My girls are finally home. I've missed you." He planted a kiss on Lucy's forehead and a lingering one on his wife's lips. He stepped back and greeted Nathan with a handshake. "You must be Nathan. Marian has told me about you. Of course, this one has been tight-lipped." He nudged his daughter playfully. "So, are you embarrassed of me?" Nathan teased wide-eyed. Lucy shook her head. "Of course not. I just knew you'd be coming with us on this trip, so why tell Dad when he'd get to know you firsthand?" "Nice cover, sweetheart," Frank said. "Come on, everybody. I'm parked just over there." The ride to their home was filled with chatter, though nothing important was brought up. Frank shared the gossip about the people in town, and Marian filled him in on the Marissa debacle. Lucy raised an eyebrow at her mother, who shook her head. "What are we doing for dinner tonight?" she asked her husband. She knew he loved to grill for big groups and would love the opportunity to show off his culinary talents. "I have steak and shrimp ready for the grill." Marian and Lucy exchanged a glance, smirking. "I thought you and Lucy could bake some potatoes and make a salad while us men work over the open flame." Lucy rolled her eyes at Nathan. "Manly men doing manly things." Nathan grinned. "I'm no slouch on the grill, sir. I'd love to help out." He looked out the window, grateful for the opportunity to speak to Lucy's father on his own. Lucy leaned over and whispered to Nathan, "I think Mom is going to tell Dad after dinner, so we can give her some support if she needs it. She's going to make his favorite dessert, banana pudding." "I think that's a good idea. I know I'm always more willing to listen if my stomach is full of good food." "Ah, something to remember." She winked at him. After a 45-minute drive, they arrived at the home Lucy had grown up in. White with a green roof, the house was only one story but wide and spacious. The front porch stretched across the entire front of the house and had two porch swings, one on each side of the green front door. Baskets with overflowing ivies hung sporadically over the rail of the porch, and tall oak trees shaded the entire front yard. Nathan, who'd grown up in the city, looked around at the large yard, the neighbors' houses spaced out, the inviting home, and sighed. Lucy looked at him questioningly. He looked down at her and wrapped an arm around her. "This place is beautiful. I've always lived in apartments except for the year I spent as a gypsy. I'd love to live in a place like this." "I didn't know you spent a year as a gypsy," Lucy said, surprised. "Yeah. Left the city and crossed the Midwest. Lived on the beach in California for a bit. Rambled across the South, made it up to Montana at one point, and finally landed back where I started." Lucy sighed with envy. "Sounds absolutely amazing. It was the best time of my life." She nudged him. "So far." He looked back at her, grinned, and squeezed her shoulders. "So far." They grabbed the bags and followed Lucy's parents into the house. Frank had taken his wife's hand as they walked, smiling down at her. Lucy had been envious of her parents' love and relationship her whole life, thinking that would never be possible for her. She looked at Nathan, and felt the love she saw in her mother's eyes when she looked at her father. "I found it," she thought. The grill was hot, almost ready for the steaks and shrimp. Frank had marinated the steaks all day, and the shrimp he'd wrapped in tinfoil with butter and various herbs from their garden. The spices smelled heavenly. He and Nathan drank beers and chatted amiably as they waited for the grill to heat. "How long have you been seeing my daughter?" "Not as long as I wish," Nathan answered, much to Frank's surprise. "Speaking of Lucy, I'd like to talk to you about something." Frank sighed. He knew what was coming, and he didn't like it. Lucy was his only daughter. He watched as Nathan fished a box out of his loose shorts. When he saw the ring box, he sighed again. "Frank, I'm in love with your daughter and I want to marry her." He glanced over his shoulder to make sure Lucy and Marian were still in the house. He opened the ring box to show Frank the ring. Frank whistled in admiration. The ring was unique like his daughter. A simple band of platinum with a round-cut diamond. Smaller diamonds were set into the band on each side of the diamond, and the platinum was shaped around the diamond in such a way that it looked like a flower. That's a beautiful ring. Did Lucy help you pick it out? No, sir. I chose it on my own. Frank smiled at Nathan. You know my daughter well, then. That is the perfect ring for her. Both fancy and simple at the same time. Nathan chuckled as he put the ring back in his pocket. The second I saw it, I knew she'd love it. Are you asking her while y'all are here? I don't think so unless the perfect time comes up. But I want to take her to the restaurant where we ate together on our first date. Make it special. She'll like that, Frank mused. You'll make her happy, I can tell. Thank you, Frank. I'm going to spend my life making her happy. Good to hear. Now let's get this food going. I'm starving. Frank slapped Nathan companionably on the back as they rose and gathered the steaks. Lucy stepped out on the porch at that moment. Hey guys, how much longer? 20 minutes, Frank called. She walked across the patio and joined them, glancing at the grill, sniffing in appreciation. I'm starving, she exclaimed with a smile. Mom and I have decided we're going to eat out here on the patio. Sounds like a plan, Frank answered as he flipped the steaks, the sizzle causing Lucy's stomach to growl loudly. She put her hand over it and laughed out loud. Marian stepped out with plates and silverware. Lucy, go inside and grab the napkins. Iced tea okay? She asked the group. Everybody nodded. You boys finished those beers before sitting down to the table. Frank rolled his eyes and took a long pull of his beer. She doesn't think beer belongs at the table, but wine is okay. Nathan laughed but drained his beer and tossed it in the outside trash can. The woman was not only his future mother-in-law, she was also his new boss. He wasn't going to annoy her the first time he was in her house. 20 minutes later, they sat down for their meal. They ate heartily, talking about everything except Marianne. They talked about what had happened to the head and Marissa, and Lucy told her father about her new position with the guard. Frank expressed concern about the safety of working there, so Nathan explained what his job was as second in command of the guard. Frank was impressed. Marian excused herself to get the banana pudding and dished out large dollops for everyone. When she sat down again, Lucy and Nathan looked at her expectantly. So, Frank, I have something important to talk to you about, Marian began. His spoon halted midway to his mouth. Her tone of voice had warned him this was important. Is everything okay? Of course. Marian cleared her throat. She loved this man and didn't want to distress him. His concern about Lucy working there meant he might not approve of her position. She looked at Lucy, who nodded her support. She yanked the Band-Aid off. Frank, I've been elected as the new head. Other than the sounds of birds and bugs in the trees, the yard was silent. Marian watched her husband. Frank's eyes had widened. He put his spoon down slowly, his banana pudding forgotten. Lucy held her spoon in a grip like a vice, while Nathan had sat back to watch. This wasn't his discussion. Marian laid her hand over Frank's. Honey, I need you to talk to me. Tell me what you think. The head of the guard? Frank asked as if he was confused about what she meant. She nodded. Yes, I was elected 2 days ago. I thought you hated the guard. They banished you from the city all those years ago. I did hate the guard when I was younger, but the head, the one who was murdered, changed the guard, made it better, more judicial and fair. I want to continue the changes that he started and make it even better. Frank shook his head. I don't understand. You were only there for a week. Yes, but things were put into motion before I even got there. Marian looked at Nathan. What I'm about to say doesn't leave this table. Understood. Frank interrupted before Nathan could reply. Wait a second. You mean you appointed Nathan as second in command? He works for you. Yes. Marian returned her gaze to Nathan, eyebrows lifted in question. As your second, Marian, all of our conversations will remain private, Nathan assured her. Marian nodded and returned her attention to her husband. Do you remember my best friend, Sarah? Frank nodded and Lucy gasped. She's the Sarah you've always talked about? Lucy asked, astonished. Marian nodded and Lucy shook her head. I had no idea. No one did really, Marian commented. Anyway, the night of the head's death, Sarah called me and told me to get my ass to the city. She's been pushing me to return and campaign for the title of head when it became available. She's been working that angle for the last year because the head had told her he planned to retire by next summer. Nathan's brow furrowed. I didn't know that. No one but Sarah knew, Marian told him. She was planning to remain with the new head for a year, then join him in retirement. She loved him, you know? That's so sad, Lucy commented. I knew she loved him. She didn't hide it well if you were observant, but I had no idea it was that deep, Nathan explained. Frank huffed out a breath, exasperated by the tangent the conversation had taken. Would you please get back to explaining to me why you are now the new head of the guard? Sorry, honey, Marian placated. I've already accepted the position. I should have asked you first, but the guard, the whole city really is in an uproar because of Marissa and her rebels. Something had to be done. And you're going to do it, he stated. But Lucy could not tell what he was thinking. His tone of voice was robotic. What happens now? The head must live in the city. There is a penthouse apartment at the top of headquarters that belongs to the head. It's bigger than our house. She laughed, but sobered quickly at his look. She held his hand. Frank, I know this is sudden, and I know this means uprooting our lives and moving far away, but I want to do this. I'll be good at it. I can make a difference. Frank watched her as she spoke so passionately about the position. Her eyes were lit with a light he hadn't seen in years. She belonged in the city, working to make it a better place. It was her calling, and he knew it, had known it for years. She'd always been a part of every do-gooder society in their small town, often in a leadership role. After several minutes of silence while he debated, he leaned forward and kissed her lips. Marianne, you will be good at it, and I'll follow you to the city and help you in any way I can. Lucy released the breath she'd been holding. She looked at Nathan, who was grinning broadly at her parents, who hadn't looked away from each other. Nathan took Lucy's hand and rose with her. Lucy and I are going for a walk to give you two some privacy. Neither of them responded. Lucy wasn't sure they had heard Nathan speaking. She and Nathan walked around the house and down the sidewalk. She led him to a park 2 streets over, where they sat on a bench in front of the creek and watched the ducks. I was so nervous. Mom just said it, with no preamble or anything. Lucy exclaimed, her hand over her heart. Your father loves your mother more than anything else. If this is what will make her happy, he'll do it. Yes, they have an enviable relationship. One I think you and I will have as we continue to grow. Lucy smiled as she leaned her head on his shoulder and watched the ducks swim gracefully by, quacking obnoxiously. What a lovely thing to say. I love you, Lucy. I love you. He turned toward her. Now was the perfect time, he decided. He didn't want to wait another minute to ask her. Lucy, that night I saw Austin attack you in front of your apartment and watched you shift to defend yourself. I knew you would be someone special in my life. When I kissed you in the alley behind the cafe, it was over. I had to make you mine. Lucy put her hand on her heart. She opened her mouth to reply, but he put his finger against her lips to stop her. Let me finish. She raised her eyebrows jokingly at his admonishment. He smiled. I've loved you since our first date, which I know sounds crazy, but I have and I do. I want to spend my life with you, Lucy. I want to spend my life making you happy. Nathan lowered himself off the bench onto one knee, pushing a duck away with his foot. It quacked loudly and waddled off, making racket the whole way. Lucy giggled and Nathan smiled. He took her left hand. Lucy, will you marry me? He slipped the ring on her finger and waited. She was frozen, alternately staring at him and the ring. After a moment of stunned silence, Nathan raised his eyebrows. Lucy! She shook herself and screamed, Yes, 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 yes. I love you. She pounced on him, her arms circling his neck, her mouth locked on his. When she stopped to take a breath, she said, I'm so surprised. I had no idea. Nathan chuckled and kissed her again. You scared me when you didn't answer right away. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you wait. I was just so stunned and happy and excited. She gushed. I can't wait to tell my mom and dad. Your dad knows. I asked him first. She looked at him sideways. So old-fashioned. I like that. We'll start planning it immediately. I don't want to wait a long time. If that's okay with you. That's perfect for me. The sooner the better. Ideas began rolling through her mind. Can the head marry us? How cool would it be if Mom married us? I don't know, babe. Nathan laughed at her excitement. I bet your mom doesn't know yet either, but we can find out. Lucy looked at him, squealed, and threw herself into his arms again. After Lucy and Nathan had come back and told them the news, they'd opened a bottle of wine. They didn't have any champagne, and toasted the happy couple. 2 bottles later, everybody was happy and sleepy. They said their good nights and went upstairs to bed with wine-infected giddiness. The next morning, Frank and Marian were up at the crack of dawn packing their house. Lucy moaned as she heard the banging. She pulled the pillow over her head and stretched her arm out to touch Nathan, but he wasn't there. She peeked out from under the pillow. He was dressed and heading out the door. Nathan, she called out before he could close it. What are you doing? Your parents have started packing. I'm going to help them. You brown-noser, she teased. He picked up the pillow he'd slept on and hit her with it. Get up, lazy ass, he replied, hitting her again with the pillow. You should be helping too. What time is it? 7. Lucy groaned and rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous, she mumbled. But she pushed the covers off and stood, stretching her arms above her head. Her breasts strained against the t-shirt she'd worn to bed, and she caught Nathan staring. What are you looking at, horndog? He bent at the waist and kissed her, massaging her breasts with his hands. When they parted, he said, If we were at home, I'd fuck you silly right now. Yeah, but we're not. We have to help pack blah blah, Lucy grumbled. At least we get a good breakfast out of it. An hour later, they'd eaten breakfast and packed most of the kitchen. Marian had decided to hire movers to get most of the stuff, but she wanted to pack her kitchen herself. Everything else she'd leave to them. She and Frank would pack suitcases of clothes and toiletries to get them through a week, which is how long the movers claimed it would take to get all of their belongings to the city. While Frank met with the movers to make the arrangements and Nathan packed up stuff in the garage, Lucy and Marian folded clothes into large suitcases. You and Dad can stay in my apartment, Mom, Lucy told her that afternoon. I've pretty much moved in with Nathan anyway. Marian lifted an eyebrow. Don't you think that's kind of soon? How long have you actually known him? Long enough, Mom, and you're one to talk. If I remember the story correctly, you and Dad knew each other only 2 months before you were married. Marian sniffed delicately. Times were different then. Lucy guffawed and dropped the blouse she'd been folding. Whatever, Mom. She stooped to retrieve the blouse. I'm so glad y'all decided not to sell the house right away. Me too. We'll need a vacation home so we can get out of the city some. Your father will need his downtime, Marian commented. Agreed. Lucy opened her mouth to continue the conversation when Marian's phone rang. It's Sarah, her mother informed her before answering. Hi, Sarah. How are things? Lucy could hear Sarah's voice speaking at a rapid-fire pace, but she couldn't understand her words. Her mother had frozen and was listening. She didn't speak for several minutes. She ended the conversation with, We'll be on the next plane. Marian looked at Lucy, her expression grim. Go get Nathan. We have to leave immediately. Why? What's wrong? Sarah received intel that Marissa is planning to attack the guard headquarters again.
Chapter 10. Marissa had set up her headquarters much like the guard. She had always liked how the guard had been run, although she didn't like the idea of a council. She wanted to be in full control, using a council only as advisors who actually had no power except what she gave them. Bobby had continued his position as her right-hand man, and he was really the only person she listened to. Although he agreed with most of her plans or ideas, occasionally he brought a new perspective to her. But if she didn't like it, she shut him down just like her counsel. In the improvised conference room, Marissa had Bobby and her 3 closest council members around the table. Bobby had acquired the blueprints of the building the guard used as their headquarters. Marissa had spent 2 days studying the blueprints and devising a plan of attack. She was ready to present it to the group of wers in front of her. Bobby would be angry, she knew, that she hadn't shared with him first, but they needed to act fast now that a new head had been elected. "I've planned an attack on the guard's headquarters," she began without preamble. No one spoke or even gasped at her claim. "I want this to happen quickly. Within the week if possible." The wers in front of her exchanged looks of unease. Bobby stared at his boss as if she were mad. "Marissa, a week is a very short time in which to plan an attack, especially on a fortress like the guard. You planned my escape in 2. With the group we have here, we should be able to plan it in a week," Marissa told him. Bobby sighed and wished again that she'd asked him before bringing this idea to everyone. "I had the element of surprise on my side when we attacked and got you out. They've no doubt doubled the security, changed all the codes, completely redone everything to prevent you and me from returning." Marissa nodded her head. "I've thought of all that, Bobby. I still have friends inside, people I asked to stay there as spies. We'll get the plans to them and let them know when to release the locks." Another wer spoke up, an older man with a scar on his cheek. "May I make a suggestion?" Marissa nodded her permission and he continued. "An attack on the guard is a workable plan if we have the right measures in place. How many do you have working at the guard?" Marissa thought and looked at Bobby, who said, "I know of 3 we have on the inside." "Yes, 3 is accurate." The scarred wer, Jay, hummed in thought. "An attack at the front of the building is stupid, but if we could get access to the roof and come down through the apartments, we'd regain the element of surprise." Marissa cocked her head. "How would we get access to the roof?" Jay's companion to the right, a female who had been on the security team as a techie, said, "There are access panels all over the roof so that maintenance can go up and repair whatever. If we can get to the roof, we can have one of your insiders unlock an access panel to let us in." Marissa nodded. "So we can get in." "Good. But how do we get up there? Helicopter? Mission Impossible style?" Bobby suggested, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Marissa raised her eyebrow. "Thank you for the suggestion. Try to be helpful." Bobby shook his head at her admonishment. "Marissa, access to the roof is strictly guarded. The blueprints show no fire escapes up to the roof. Someone would literally have to be dropped from the sky to get to the roof." And, the female wer, Katrine, continued. "We couldn't lead an army down through the roof. 1 or 2 front men would have to go in, get all the way down to the doors without being detected as intruders, and let us in." Jay lifted his hand. "I volunteer to go in from the roof. I have a friend with a helicopter, actually, who would drop me from a height above. I'd parachute in, just like during the war. Would you need a second?" "It would be better if I didn't, but I should take someone, yes. It would be safer with 1 other person." Jay scratched his cheek over the scar. "I have a guy in mind." We change out of our gear and into civilian clothes and walk down. You'll just have to make sure someone is there to open the access panel for us. "That will happen, no problem," Bobby said, apparently now on board that a realistic plan of action had been found. "Luckily, one of the guys inside is in maintenance, so there won't be a question about why he's up there." Marissa nodded and rubbed her hands together gleefully. "Yes, this is all coming together." The last advisor, a young man with eyes the color of steel, lifted his hand. "I have a question." "Yes?" What is the purpose of attacking the guard? What do we hope to accomplish? Marissa pointed at him. An excellent question. She swept her eyes over the group, looking at each of them before continuing. The first goal is to take over the guard headquarters and turn it into our own. Everyone in the room nodded their heads. If their ultimate goal was to take over the city and create a paradise free of all humans, the guard's headquarters were the best place to set up the government. It was more centralized than their current base, and it was already set up as a building for a government entity. Bobby was the only one who seemed suspicious of Marissa's second goal. What's the second? She looked at them to make sure every eye was on her. We will kill everywhere we can who is affiliated with the guard. Eliminate as many enemies as possible, and we'll have less to worry about later. Only Jay nodded. I agree. This is war. Katrine had sat back and remained silent, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with Marissa or Jay. The younger had nodded his head once, his face a passive mask showing no thoughts. Bobby only stared at her. Marissa cleared her throat when she looked at Bobby, seeing his displeasure. She rose, indicating the meeting was over. We'll come together again and set the date of attack. Jay, you'll handle the roof and entrance. I'll speak with Carl about how the training is going downstairs before I make a decision about when we'll do it. The worst stood in unison and walked out, except Bobby. He stood next to Marissa, an unhappy frown on his face. Marissa, killing everyone there? Is that really the answer? Marissa cocked an eyebrow at him. Bobby, you're going to have to change your mindset. Jay's right. This is war. Marissa, there are innocent people who work there, men and women with children at home. They aren't soldiers who knowingly put their lives at risk in battle. They are the enemy. She walked out of the room before he could reply. He stared after her, uncomfortable with her behavior, her power lust. A year ago, she would never have given an order like this one, to slaughter innocent people. She had changed, her priorities had changed. Her idea to create a war-only city had become an obsession that had slowly sucked away her humanity. Bobby didn't like the new Marissa, the one who planned to proclaim herself queen once she'd won the city. Her idea wasn't progressive, as she claimed, she wanted a dictatorship. He looked at the phone he held in his hand. He had some calls to make. Frank drove Marianne, Lucy, and Nathan to the airport that evening. Sarah had arranged a private plane to fly them back so they didn't have to wait for a scheduled flight the next day. Marianne spent the entire time on the phone, as did Nathan, handling business as best they could from several states away. Lucy twisted her engagement ring around and around on her finger. She'd chosen to sit up front with her dad so Marianne and Nathan could talk about whatever they needed to talk about. Dad, are you sure you can handle the movers and all that? Lucy asked, not because she didn't think he could, but because she didn't want to sit in silence listening to her mother and her fiancé make what could turn into war plans. Frank looked at his daughter. He took her hand and squeezed it, forcing her to stop the fidgeting. I can, honey. He whispered, you and I have chosen people who are natural leaders to love. It will be hard on us, there will be times, like now, when we're terrified for them, but we'll love them anyway and do what we can to help them. Lucy smiled at her father's wisdom. She was terrified. Marissa was insane, and insane people don't worry about the effects of their choices. She had killed the head in cold blood, a man she'd worked very closely with for more than a decade, as if he hadn't mattered to her at all. She wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone, as far as Lucy was concerned. She looked back at her mother and her fiancé and sighed. Her father squeezed her hand again, and she smiled at him. Thanks, Dad, she said to him. You can expect a lot of phone calls this week, she laughed. I'm sure. When they reached the airport, they said their goodbyes to Frank, who promised he'd be there by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest. Who knows? Maybe you'll have all this nonsense handled and we can relax into our new life, he said to Marianne as he held her close. She leaned back and looked at him. That's my plan, handsome man. They laughed together. Nathan shook Frank's hand and Lucy hugged him tight, then they boarded the plane while he waved from the tarmac. On the plane, business continued thanks to the Wi-Fi the airplane boasted. Lucy chose to nap while listening to the buzz of Marianne's and Nathan's voices, speaking to each other or on their phones, planning for every contingency that might come up. She slept fitfully, her fear a tangible thing in the pit of her stomach. Marianne called the council members, explaining the situation briefly and promising more details at the meeting that needed to take place at 6 that morning. She glanced at her watch. It was 3:30 right now. The plane would land by 5:30, so they'd have plenty of time to get to headquarters since Sarah had also arranged for a car to meet them on the runway. When she hung up, she looked at Nathan for what information he'd gathered from one of his many spies. I have a spy in Marissa's group, as you know. She's actually in her inner circle, so to speak, Nathan informed Marianne. She's been sending me details off and on all day. Nathan outlined the plan for her, giving every detail he had. Marissa planned to send someone in through the roof, who would let the army in. She wanted her army to kill as many as possible. Marianne gasped but didn't interrupt. Nathan nodded at her horror and continued. Marissa hasn't settled on a date yet. She wants to see how the training is going before she decides, but my person tells me she wants to attack by the end of the week. The end of the week? Marianne repeated dully, shaking her head. That doesn't leave us a lot of time to strategize. And we have to warn everyone who works in the building. And security. I've already been on the phone with Matt. He's beefing up the security, calling in extra guys, everything we need to be doing. Nathan paused before telling her Matt's idea. Matt thinks since we have the location of her base, we should attack first. Marianne raised her eyebrows in surprise. An attack? Do we have the manpower for that? Defending is one thing, attacking is something else. We don't have an army. Neither does she, which is why her plan will probably fail. But at what cost? She'll kill everyone in her way, Nathan asked, sitting up and speaking passionately. What Matt is thinking is that we go in stealth mode and kidnap Marissa. Marianne nodded at the idea. She was twirling her pen in her hand like a baton, something Frank would recognize as her thoughtful twirl. Nathan let her have time to think, let her mind percolate the idea and see where it went. She finally nodded after several minutes of silence. I think that's a good idea. This won't end until she's been taken down. I agree. I honestly don't think this rebellion will continue without her. Gods, this is insane, Marianne mumbled. She rubbed her eyes and reached in her bag for some eye drops. Nathan watched her put them in and said, maybe we should try to nap for the rest of the flight. We won't be getting much sleep the next few days. Marianne nodded and watched as Nathan rose to lay a blanket over Lucy's sleeping form. He kissed her forehead gently. I'm very glad you're going to be a part of our family, Nathan. Nathan smiled down at his future bride. Me too. Would you like a blanket while I'm up? Yes, thank you. The plane landed exactly on time. Sarah waited in the car to take them to headquarters. She had information for Marianne and Nathan, though nothing they hadn't already heard from different sources. Lucy listened closely as they talked about the plan to kidnap Marissa and wondered if they shouldn't just kill her. She immediately felt guilty about the thought. She deserved a fair trial, even if she was a piece of crap. Lucy giggled at her small curse, catching Nathan's attention. "What's so funny?" he asked after taking her hand. Marianne and Sarah continued the conversation around them. "I'm just thinking ugly things about Marissa. You know, like how funny it would be if she fell off the roof or something equally death-causing," she said. He shook his head at her and kissed her nose, then returned to the conversation. They arrived at headquarters at 5 minutes to 6 and rushed up to the meeting. Nathan had asked Matt to join them and explain his plan, which he did with full details about how to get to Marissa. "I'm working on getting more intel for you, Matt," Nathan told him. "But the plan sounds pretty solid to me." "Why are we considering this?" one of the council members asked. "Without Marissa, the rebellion will crumble," Marianne insisted. "We need her here, in a cell guarded 24 hours a day with no access to guests." Nathan spoke up. "According to my sources, she plans to have her wers kill everyone they find in this building, assuming they get that far. She will not take prisoners. Too many lives are at stake to wait for her to attack." Several wers nodded in agreement. Marianne asked for a vote on the plan, which passed with only 2 who voted against it. She looked at Matt. "Matt, make your plans. Bring them to me as soon as you've got them hashed out." "Nathan, I need you to meet with Andrew Quisenberry to let him know what's happening." "Lucy, you need to go with Nathan in case Andrew's thinking we need some kind of press release. Although I'd rather not warn the public about dangerous wars, we may not have a choice if Matt's plan fails." Everyone nodded and began working on their plans. Nathan glanced down as his phone vibrated. Bobby's name popped up on the screen. He snapped his fingers to get Marianne and Matt's attention. "Hello?" "Hello, Nathan," Bobby said, his voice clear and loud. "Hello, Bobby. Marissa has gone insane." "Gone insane?" Nathan scoffed. "Pal, she's been insane for years." "Yes, but it's worse. She's planning an attack on the guards' headquarters and plans to kill everyone she finds inside." "Yes, we've heard the rumors. Why are you calling me?" "I want to help you stop her. Her plans are outrageous. She wants to kill humans too, anyone who isn't with her. Can you hold on, please?" Nathan muted the phone and looked at Marianne and Matt and recounted the conversation. "Do we trust him?" Marianne asked. "Have him meet you somewhere. You'll know whether he's lying or not. If he's not lying about helping us, he'd be a great asset to have. He could get us very close to Marissa," Matt said. Nathan nodded. "Bobby, I need you to meet with me. I can't trust a phone call." "Understood." They agreed on a place and time and ended the phone call. Nathan looked at the other 2. "I'll let you know, I guess." Lucy stepped forward. "Do not go by yourself. That man could be as dangerous as Marissa." Matt nodded in agreement. "I'll go with you and stay hidden. He won't know I'm there." "All right. I'm going after my meeting with Andrew. I'll swing back by here and pick you up." Matt nodded and left the room. Lucy put her arms around Nathan in a side hug. He turned to face her. "Thank you for taking someone." "You're welcome. It's the smart thing." Nathan hesitated. "Listen, I'm going on the mission to kidnap Marissa." Lucy snapped back and stared at him. "What? Why? That's not your job." "It is my job," Nathan defended. "No, it used to be your job. Now you're second." "You don't work in the field," Lucy argued, fear plain in her eyes and voice. "Lucy, I've been working in the field for years. This isn't even the most dangerous thing I've done." Please don't fuss, Nathan said, running his hands up and down her back. Fine. But if you get hurt, I'll never forgive you, she said. He laughed. Fair deal. After the meeting with Andrew, which went well, Nathan picked up Matt and they headed to the meeting with Bobby. Andrew had asked to be kept informed of all progress or lack thereof, and he would do what he could to keep the city calm. They agreed after the Marissa situation was handled, he wanted he and Marianne to hold a joint press conference to introduce the ideas and present the changes that would happen due to the integration. Matt hopped in Nathan's car and asked where they were going for the meeting. He asked to meet at an apartment building over by the river. He says the apartment is his hideaway. Huh. Sounds a little suspicious. It does, but I know why he has it, although he doesn't know I know. Nathan paused to check a street sign. He's gay but doesn't want people to know about it. He meets men there. Why doesn't he want anyone to know? I'm not sure. There are plenty of gay wers around, and they live perfectly normal lives. We just need to keep an eye out, check out the parking lot, the lobby, everything before we lock ourselves in a tight spot. 15 minutes later, they pulled up in front of the apartment building and looked around. Neither of them saw anything suspicious, so they climbed out and walked upstairs. Bobby answered the door quickly and beckoned them inside. Hello, Nathan, Bobby said. He looked a little haggard. Thank you for coming. Hi, Bobby. This is Matt, Nathan introduced. Yes, I remember. Bobby shut the door and walked to a chair and gestured for them to sit on the couch. I want to help you stop Marissa. She's lost her mind. She's dangerous. Nathan nodded. Explain to me why I should believe you. You have no reason to, I understand. But I can help you and will. Matt sat forward. If you want to be rid of her, why not just kill her? You have access to her, and by yourself, all the time. I'm no killer. I don't have the guts, Bobby answered. But I do have the guts to help you get in and kill her. Nathan frowned. He believed him, despite his past behavior. He'd known Bobby for almost as long as he'd known Marissa, and even though he was thoroughly Marissa's man, he had always been logical. He'd gone to the head more than once because he didn't agree with Marissa and couldn't talk her out of something. What if I told you we didn't want to kill her? Bobby looked confused. What do you want to do then? Answer this first. If she's out of the picture, what happens to the rebellion? Nathan asked. Bobby furrowed his brows in thought. There's no one else who can lead. It will fall apart, I'm sure. Nathan and Matt exchanged a look. Nathan raised his eyebrows at him, and Matt nodded. He believed him as well. Nathan looked at Bobby and said, We want to kidnap her and put her on trial for treason. Will you help us get to her? Bobby smiled and pulled out a roll of paper. He unfolded it, revealing detailed blueprints of the building Marissa and her wers occupied. Nathan and Matt exchanged a smile and leaned forward as Bobby began to speak.
Chapter 11. Nathan and Matt will lead, going in from the roof with 4 other wers. The other 4 will provide lookout and guard over Nathan and Matt as they make their way to Marissa. With the information Bobby has given us, we have an exact location and time where Marissa will be. Marian studied the council members around her, avoiding looking at her daughter, who she knew was not happy about the plan. Nathan took up the explanation, pointing at the blueprints Bobby had smuggled to him at their meeting earlier in the day. We'll enter here, which Bobby will have unlocked for us. The stairwell leads directly to the level Marissa has allocated for her sleeping quarters. The only person allowed in there is Bobby, and then only when she's there. Bobby will be waiting for us in the apartment. He's arranged for he and Marissa to finalize the plans for the attack, Matt continued. which, by the way, is supposed to take place on Monday, we learned. Monday. That's soon, Marian mused. If you fail to take Marissa tonight, she's sure to move the attack up. Everyone nodded in agreement. Lucy could contain herself no longer. Although she and Nathan had already discussed this, she wasn't happy about it. Can someone please explain to me why Nathan and Matt are going down alone? Doesn't that seem unnecessarily dangerous? Marian eyed her daughter. Nathan and Matt have both been trained for this kind of mission. Matt commented. And we've both been on missions like this before. Nathan walked over and took her hand. I know you don't like this, but it has to be this way. Lucy threw her hands up. This is insane. She's insane. And how do you know Bobby isn't full of shit? Isn't setting you up? One of the council members agreed. I agree with Lucy. How do you know Bobby, who I watched kill another were in cold blood when they helped Marissa escape, isn't trying to get you there for hostages? Nathan, not to inflate your ego, but you'd be worth a lot to get back, and Marissa knows that. Nathan shook his head. She'd kill me. She hates my guts. Oh well, that makes me feel better, Lucy huffed. Marian interrupted the argument. The decision has already been voted on and decided. Nathan and Matt will complete this mission. Lucy glared at her mother but remained silent. Matt asked, When do we leave? Nathan, who had one arm around Lucy, replied, 8 o'clock. Lucy huffed back to her office, refusing to speak until she got there. When the door had closed behind Nathan, she turned and pointed a hand at him. This is absurd. Lucy, we've discussed this. I told you I was going, Nathan placated, gently taking the finger she pointed at him in his hand. She jerked her hand away. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it. Damn it. Her anger deflated quickly, and although she wanted to cry, she didn't. I don't want you to go. He took her in his arms and said, I know, but I promise I'll be more careful than I've ever been. I have you to come home to. She pulled back. You do, Nathan. I've only known you a short time, but my life won't be complete without you in it. If something were to happen to you. She left her sentence unfinished because she couldn't say the words out loud. She shook her head and blinked rapidly. She would not let the tears fall. I love you so much. I love you. He kissed her deeply, holding her close and running his hands down her back. I found out that now that your mom is the official head, she can marry us. So, if you're willing, I'd like to marry you this afternoon. Lucy stared up at him. Are you serious? Nathan's smile faltered a little. I am, but if you'd rather wait and have a wedding, I'm fine with that too. Tears fell now silently. Lucy, baby, please don't cry. Or please tell me those are tears of yes. Yes, let's do it. We can Skype Dad in to watch. I'll call Kayla and get her over here, Lucy gushed. Mom won't mind the interruption for happy business. Let's do it. Nathan wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off her feet. Damn, woman. I love everything about you. She threw her head back and laughed. Let me go, you silly man. I got to call Kayla and get her here. You go tell Mom. Yes, dear, Nathan said with a grin. Not even married yet, and I'm already saying yes, dear. Get. She shooed him out of her office and picked up the phone to call Kayla, who said she'd be there in 30 minutes. Lucy sat down after hanging up the phone. She looked up at the ceiling and said to herself, I'm getting married in an hour. Astonishment and happiness battled in her heart as her mother rushed in. Lucy, I'm so happy for you. I can't wait to perform the ceremony, Marian gushed. But get up. We have to get to the store to buy you a dress. Mom, we don't have time to find a wedding dress. This is happening within the hour so Nathan can prepare for the mission. Marian waved her hand at her daughter impatiently. Not a wedding dress, but something better than the business suit you're wearing. I told Nathan he had to go upstairs and put on a suit. So let's go. Lucy rose to her feet slowly, and although she appeared exasperated by her mother's insistence, she was excited that her mother wanted her in a proper dress, even if it wasn't a wedding dress. Do you think Dad will get mad? Lucy asked as they rushed to the elevators. I don't think so. We'll call him on the way. We can Skype him in, Lucy reminded her mom. Of course. That way he'll see it, Marian exclaimed as they stepped off the elevator and hurried to Nathan's car. Come on. We only have 30 minutes. You have to get back so we can do your hair and makeup. Oh, Mom, we don't have to do all of that, Lucy replied, a big smile on her face. Marian stopped and said, We damn sure do. This is the only time you'll get married. Now hurry up. The wedding was actually almost an hour and a half later. Kayla had rushed in and handed Lucy a bouquet of lilies, Lucy's favorite flower. Lucy hugged her best friend, who immediately began helping Marian with her makeup and hair. Lucy watched in the mirror as they transformed her from her regular self to this beauty sitting in the chair. Oh, honey, I can't wait to see Nathan's face when he sees you, Marian said, tears in the corners of her eyes. Let's do this, Mom, Lucy said bravely before she started with the waterworks as well. Marian left and took her place at the front of the conference room. They'd decided a somewhat private ceremony was in the cards. The only attendees were Kayla, Sarah, Matt, and Belina. Frank, via Skype, watched with tears tracking down his cheeks as his only child walked down the aisle to her future. She blew him a kiss as she walked by Sarah, who held the laptop up for him. Nathan gasped when he turned to look at her. Her chocolate skin glowed with happiness, and her brown eyes shone with unshed happiness. The dress she and her mother had chosen flowed down her body in glorious white silk, matching the lilies in her hand perfectly. Nathan couldn't look at anything but her, even as Marian began the ceremony. He watched her, the love of his life, as he spoke his vows and she spoke hers. When asked about the rings, Lucy gasped, Oh, Nathan, I don't have one for you. Lucy looked devastated. She'd given Matt her engagement ring to take to Nathan, but had never even thought about one for him. She looked at her mother. What do I do? It's okay, honey. The two of you can buy him one later. Marianne comforted her. Kayla hopped up and handed Lucy a ring. Lucy raised her eyes in question. This is my dad's. I wear it around my neck to remember him by. He'd love it if you used it to show your love for Nathan. Lucy said, Kayla, we can't take this. What if you want to give it to your husband someday? I never intended it for that, Kayla replied. I knew one day I'd find its use. This is it. Please take it and marry this handsome man beside you. She kissed Lucy's cheek and returned to her seat. Lucy placed it on Nathan's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for him. Kayla beamed. The ceremony ended with a loud, smacking kiss and cheers from those around them. Lucy was disappointed that they couldn't sneak away for an hour or two for a little loving, but she wanted her husband to be well prepared for the mission that night. They settled for a quick, catered early dinner before returning to the planning. At 15 minutes to 8, Nathan, Matt, and the small group of wers were prepared with weapons and Mission Impossible black outfits that looked right for Tom Cruise or possibly ninjas. Lucy stared at them, grumbling about the insanity of the plan. Her nerves were on fire. As they prepared to leave, she stepped forward. Please be careful. Watch for any traps. I will, my loving wife, Nathan replied and kissed her nose. I'll be back before you know it. I love you. I love you. He kissed her once more. Matt rumbled. Y'all are making me sick. Can we get this done with? Nathan laughed and slapped his back. Let's go. Nathan, Matt, and their team silently scaled the building beside Marissa's headquarters. A catwalk extended from the roof over to Marissa's roof, and Bobby had assured them that the catwalk was not guarded because the building next door was condemned and dangerous. When they reached the roof, Nathan silently pointed at the hatch that was supposed to be open for them. Matt walked over, and with the help of another they lifted the heavy door, which, as promised, was unlocked. Matt lowered himself down first and did a scan of the room in which he found himself. Piled high with outdated office equipment, it was clear the only person who had been up there recently was the person who had unlocked the door for them. He motioned for the other to join him. Two would stay at the opening leading to the roof to guard their escape route. They enabled their night vision goggles so they wouldn't have to use flashlights and wouldn't trample over everything and cause unnecessary noise. Nathan located the stairs to their left, but that wasn't the set that led down to Marissa's apartment. Matt indicated the footprints, and they followed those to another set of stairs further away from the hatch. Nathan realized what a pain it was going to be to get Marissa out without alerting anyone and considered knocking her out. Silently, with Matt in the lead, Nathan and the other two following, they made their way down the stairs and into a hallway. Nathan did a quick surveillance for cameras, but there were none. The building was ancient and didn't have the proper wiring for that. There were only 2 doors, one on the left, one on the right. Marissa had commandeered both of these apartments for herself, but Bobby had assured them she would be in the one to the left. Matt put his ear to the door and listened. He nodded when he heard voices. The other 2 wers nodded at his signal to stay and guard the hallway while he and Nathan went in to get Marissa. Matt stepped back and kicked the door with all his might. It burst open and into a living area with older furniture. Marissa had jumped up at the sound and was moving toward another room, while Bobby rose more slowly and stepped out of the way. Nathan followed Marissa. There wasn't an escape back that way, but she might have a weapon back there. Matt was fast on his heels. They rushed through a door and heard the explosion of a gun. Nathan jerked back, but Matt barreled past and knelt on the ground, his own weapon drawn and aimed at Marissa's chest. Nathan peeked around the corner and looked at Marissa. She smirked. "Of course it's you, Nathan. Come on in. Did you kill Bobby on your way past?" "No. Come with us, Marissa. You won't get past the 2 guards we have stationed outside this apartment, and this room has no other exit that won't kill you." Marissa seemed to consider his advice. "Let me explain something to you. I would rather smash myself on the pavement 8 stories below than go with you and sit in a cell." Nathan regarded her. "Honestly, I doubt you'd be in a cell for long." Marissa lifted her gun and pointed it at Nathan. "Your man might kill me after I shoot you in the head, but it would almost be worth it." "Wrong again. He won't kill you. He'll just wound you and take you in anyway," Nathan assured her. He stepped closer. "Just drop it, Marissa." Matt had risen from his kneeling position on the floor. "Nathan, I can shoot her leg or shoulder right now. She'll drop the gun." Nathan shrugged and looked at Marissa. "One last chance, Marissa. Drop the gun or Matt is going to shoot you. You'll drop the gun either way." Without removing her eyes from Nathan's, she turned the gun on Matt and fired a single shot, hitting him high in the chest. Nathan yelled, but rather than moving to Matt, as Marissa had expected, he slammed his body into hers and they fell to the floor with grunts. The gun went flying, and he wrestled handcuffs on her before she could shift. Bobby walked into the room to survey the scene. He knelt beside Matt and tried to staunch the blood. Marissa saw him and screeched, "Bobby, what the hell?" Realization struck when he didn't look at her. "You traitor. I'll have you killed." She continued to rant until he stood, walked over to her, and slammed her head into the floor, knocking her unconscious. He looked at Nathan. She wouldn't have gone quietly. Nathan nodded and returned his attention to Matt, who had already passed. He shook his head and asked, "Will anyone come running after hearing those gunshots?" "I doubt it. We hear them off and on all the time in this neighborhood," Bobby replied. "Go get one of the guys at the door. I can carry Marissa while the 2 of you carry Matt's body. We aren't leaving him here." After a difficult trip back to the guard's headquarters, Nathan was on his way to give a report to Marianne and the council members, but he called Lucy first. She's rushed down to meet him, had been in tears when she saw Matt's body. His body would be taken to the morgue housed in the lowest level of the headquarters. Nathan instructed the guards to take Marissa to the holding cell she'd previously occupied and remove the cuffs. "I want 2 guards at her door 24/7. She is not allowed any guests at all," Nathan ordered. "Bobby, you'll come with me to the conference room." Bobby, who was also in cuffs, nodded his head. After helping Nathan and the Wers with Matt's body, Nathan had put the cuffs on him, explaining that it was protocol. Nathan planned to vouch for Bobby as much as possible, but he knew the man would have to face some punishment for his part in the breakout. Bobby knew it too, but he didn't care. He'd had to help stop Marissa's insanity before she destroyed the city. Marian raised an eyebrow at Bobby's entrance. She waited for Marissa to walk in as well. Where is Marissa? Marissa was knocked out during the altercation, Nathan explained. I've had her taken to a cell. Guards. 2 at all times and no visitors. Good. Marian looked at Bobby, who didn't look at all scathed by the events of the evening. This is Bobby? Yes. He came voluntarily, Nathan told her. He sat down and gratefully took the water bottle Lucy offered him. She handed one to Bobby as well, who murmured his thanks and drank a hearty gulp. Tell us what happened, please, Marian asked Nathan. Everything went well until we got in the apartment. Marissa ran to a back room where she had a pistol. She threatened to kill me, had the gun pointed at me, but shot Matt because we weren't prepared for her to do that. He died in the apartment. Marian nodded, sadness etched on her face. A couple of the council members wiped tears away. Matt had been with the guard for nearly 20 years, working his way up from security guard to head of security. He'd been well liked by everyone. Marian looked around the room. We have a decision to make. Wers do not take their traitors to the human courts. Those of us, here in this room, choose the punishment of those who disobey our higher laws. She looked at Bobby. Bobby, what do you have to say for yourself? Nathan interjected. Before he speaks, may I just say that the capture of Marissa wouldn't have happened without him. Yes, but what I did beforehand I am willing to answer for. Bobby looked at everyone in the room, meeting their eyes. He confessed. I helped Marissa escape, and in the process, I killed at least one were with my own hands. The elder werewolf, Emmett, said, because of his help tonight, I move that we do not execute this young man. What do you propose? Marian asked. Imprisonment. For a reasonable amount of time as befitting the crimes he has confessed to, Emmett answered. Banishment is also an option, Edward pointed out. Marian thought over both options and decided, I think banishment is worse than imprisonment. I move to banish this were from this city forever and always. Emmett seconded the motion, and with a chorus of ayes, Bobby's fate was decided. We'll have him escorted out of town in 2 days. Until then, he will remain in a cell far away from Marissa, Marianne announced. Bobby's face had remained passive during the voting and sentencing. He rose with poise and addressed the group. Thank you for your leniency. Nathan motioned for a security guard to take him downstairs. Marian returned her attention to the group after he'd left. And now we decide Marissa's fate. Edward raised his hand. Will we allow her to defend herself? Marian considered the question. She addressed the whole group. She addressed the entire group. Will your verdict be any different if we hear her out? The consensus was no. Regardless of her defense, they'd all seen the video of her killing the head. They'd all seen her behavior at the head's funeral. She'd killed Matt in cold blood, and any questions they still had could most certainly be answered by Bobby. Marissa's fate was decided in just a few short minutes. Execution. Marian met with Andrew Quisenberry the next day to let him know Marissa had been arrested and would be executed for her crimes. He had not questioned the decision. Lucy and Robert set about writing a press release for the two of them to present together at a press conference the next week. They would not only discuss all the events that Marissa had set into motion but would also begin bringing the idea of integration into the public eye. The two of them discussed the long road ahead but knew that it would be worth every bit of trouble when their city became one of the first larger cities to integrate. Lucy and Nathan were relieved when they were finally able to go up to their apartment and relax. They had ordered takeout Chinese and were playing with their chopsticks. Lucy got frustrated and grabbed a fork, but Nathan was persistent and eventually could eat everything but the rice with the chopsticks. You have no patience, my lovely wife, Nathan commented. Lucy growled at him in response. Shut up, my rude husband. He laughed around his kung pao chicken and reached over to squeeze her thigh. Not rude, just honest. She scoffed. Semantics. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Nathan smiled at her when she watched him using his chopsticks as if he'd been born in China. She rolled her eyes and threw a piece of broccoli at him, which he deftly caught in his mouth and ate. Thanks. I wanted to try your broccoli, he said. She carefully put her fork down, removed his chopsticks from his hand, and launched herself on him. They wrestled, giggling like teenagers, and before long, that wrestling turned into making out. Clothes were discarded quickly. Skin-to-skin contact enhanced their arousal, and they made love on the floor of their living room as husband and wife. The end. If you want more paranormal romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.